Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was lost in the world of Titans? Part 3. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Get on your knees. I stared back at the man, anger seeping out of every single one of my pores. This man, if anyone could even call him that anymore, held all the cards and there was nothing I could do. I said on your knees or they die. Balling my hands into fists, I dropped to the ground below. Good, just what I want to see from the Hokage to be. The man said with a sinister smile as I looked at three heavily sedated people laying down on separate operating tables behind the white-cloaked man. Blue glowing wires extended out from his fingers to the darkness above, easily spelling doom if I made any wrong move. The figures before me were not real, well, not real as in they weren't here. This was simply a projection from a different place. He would never show his true face. Why? I asked softly. I knew the man hated me, at least I thought he did, but for what? It was something that I've been trying to learn for some time, but found nothing. So you want to know why, for the past 2 months, that I've made your life a living hell? Why I would go through the careful planning of kidnapping the wife and children of the hero of the shinobi world? Well, the answer is actually quite simple really. The man said as he twitched his ring finger. A blade slowly appeared from the darkness above towards the table on the right, but stopped just as it entered the light. Because it's art, it's a show that will be remembered by me, and you. His smile broadened as he twitched his middle and pointer finger. 2 more blades appeared above the other 2 occupants. You're mad, I responded, only for the man to laugh manically. Mad, all artists are mad, haven't you learned that by now? But it's a shame, with those beasts being sealed away you can't turn into that demon. It would have made an interesting change to the overall painting. The man responded as he walked to the center table. He caressed his hand over the woman's cheek and chuckled. Such a wonderful family, you should be very proud of them, but, the blade above violently shot downwards, piercing her chest and the table below. Blood burst forth, spraying the man and table alike. No, I shot to my feet, but the other 2 blades moved even closer to the 2 children on the other 2 tables. Such a beautiful face she made when I told her of my art as well. She tried her best to protect your children from what was to come, the man sighed affectionately as he recalled what the woman had tried to do. It only painted an even greater masterpiece. You 3 must have been very close. The man looked over to me, only to see tears falling from my stunned eyes. He smiled at the scene. Drama, emotions, sadness. It brings tears to my eyes to see such a magnificent performance. The man exclaimed as he moved around the table. This is beauty at its finest. I could only stare at the body in complete shock. Just like that she was dead. Gone from this world in the blink of an eye, and there was nothing I could have done about it. My wife was. And now what of the girl? Barely a few years old and an important part of the painting as well. He grinned once he reached the table on the left. A small child lay on the table, sleeping away all her cares in the world. You wouldn't dare. Ah, but I would. Children play important roles in my art that couldn't otherwise be filled. Please, let me demonstrate. The man said as he took a step back, only for the blade to shoot down. I fell to my knees as the blood ran down the silver table, much like the one in the center. Do you see? It adds an aspect that would normally never be seen, but it's a shame. The man walked over to the body of the young girl with a slight frown. A shame that blood doesn't come in more colors. Oh well, an artist must make do with the materials at hand. I could only watch in despair as he moved over to his final victim, a young boy with blonde hair much like my own. Out of either of the children, this one resembles you the most. Ah, the things he said when he learned of the situation they were in. My dad will come here and save us. Just you wait and see. He's the hero of the shinobi world. Such faith that his father would come, only for him to slowly lose that blind faith when 2 months passed and still no word from his beloved father came. I'm going to kill you. Of course you are. It is the nature of man to want to kill one another, but didn't you fight to break that cycle of hate? Who would you be if you went against everything you stood for? But, if I were to be the one to break the hero himself, then it would only paint an even greater masterpiece. Yes, let us see if we can make an even more magnificent painting together. The man said with a sinister smile as the final blade plunged into the boy. No, XXXXX, scene end. I shot up from the bed, sweat beating across my body as the memories from the dream flashed to the forefront of my mind. Breathing heavily, my eyes quickly danced across the dark room, looking for any abnormalities that may have occurred during my restless slumber. Nothing seemed out of place, so my mind began to settle as my head hit the pillow behind me. That dream, it felt so real. Shaking my head, I stood from the bed and moved to the small wooden table that sat in the corner of the room. Looking over to the second double bed in the dark room, I could see Annie's chest rise and fall, sleeping soundly to the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Why did I save her from the clutches of the military? Yes, it was part of the mission to gain cooperation with the Greys, but that didn't mean saving her was the best option. I could have just as easily killed her instead and thus freeing me from having to look over my shoulder, but something stopped me from doing so. Bad dream, a voice said from across the table. My eyes looked over to the dark figure that has continually plagued my sanity. I knew that nobody could see her, and knowing that she was just a figment of my imagination has helped me keep whatever sanity I had left. Even still, you could say that, I responded to the white and crimson-eyed shade. The dark figure sat down in one of the open chairs across from me, sighing as she did so. What was it about? I don't know. It's just a dream anyway. True, the shade leaned back into the chair, her 2 eyes staying focused on me. But it doesn't sound like just a dream. It really shook you, Naruto-kun. Memories from my past were beginning to come back to me, albeit slowly, but returning nonetheless. Was this dream one of the many memories that happened in the past? I looked to the shade across the table with a mixture of confusion and sadness. I saw the death of 3 people. People that I once called family, I think. It hurts to try and remember their names, or anything about them for that matter. That's great news. Maybe one day you'll remember everything from your past. Maybe. Normally these memories don't hurt as much. Why do these memories bring so much pain? Well, you were the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. So it would only make sense that the memories that are returning are going to hit close to home. The shade deducted. I've been keeping in contact with the little fox from time to time. He's been bored, but it looked as if he was working on something, so lately I've decided to leave the fox to his own devices. Naruto. I looked over to the side, only to see Annie slowly waking up. Were you talking to somebody? My eyes glanced back over to where the shade once sat, only for the seat to be empty. Just thinking out loud. Sleep well, I replied as Annie sat up in her bed and looked to the window. The morning sky was a dark gray, but the sun still rested under the horizon. Annie didn't respond as she plopped her head back onto her pillow. The sound of distant thunder could be heard, meaning rain was soon to come along with it. Once Annie agreed to come along with me, we quickly moved down to the farming village that we saw atop the tree we were perched on the night before and rented a room in the local tavern. The room and food was cheap, which was a good thing since the only money I had left was from what was given to me earlier by the pious family. It should last us until we made it to the Gray's base, but if push came to shove then I'd find us some money. Chuckling at the laziness that she showed, I stood up and moved towards the door while placing my cloak over my body with the hood down. After doing this I placed my gray backpack onto my back. Tired. Yesterday was a long day. I wasn't expecting to be attacked by the entire Survey Corps while inside the city. Annie said as she rolled over to face me. Her jacket and boots were off, but otherwise everything else remained on. Going somewhere. Thought I'd go take a look around the village before we leave. Want to come along? Annie rolled back over and looked to the ceiling and thought. Sure. After placing the missing articles of clothing onto her body, Annie followed me out into the main commune room. It was empty, save for an elderly woman sweeping the uneven wooden floor. Thank you for the room, I said as Annie and I walked by. My pleasure, dearie. You and your sister can come back anytime. We looked at one another for a moment before nodding our heads in unison. We will. Take care, I replied as we exited the building and onto the single dirt road that ran through the center of town. It was still slightly dark out, with such ominous dark clouds hanging overhead, but we had enough light to manage our way around. First thing we need to do is either find you a backpack of some sort, or a large enough cloak to cover everything to your knees. Annie looked to me in confusion, making me sigh. Wearing your 3D maneuver gear everywhere is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. We need to be able to hide your weapons if we want to stay unnoticed by the military. Oh, so, which would you prefer? A jacket and a backpack, or a cloak large enough to hide your weapons? The blonde girl put some thought into it as we slowly made our way down the dirt street. As she thought, I saw a larger woman standing outside of what looked to be a clothing shop. She had curly brown hair and wired glasses. You there, the girl with the blonde hair. The woman shouted as she quickly made her way towards us. I see you're part of the military. You wouldn't happen to need some accessories to go along with your uniform, would you? I internally chuckled at the woman's drive to sell her products. Soldiers would often move through farming villages and towns to transport cargo or personnel from place to place. As they moved through these towns, villagers would attempt to sell them merchandise to make some extra money. It's a well-known fact that putting anything extra onto your uniform is strictly prohibited unless ordered by a superior officer, and if a soldier was caught with something extra then they were required to take it off, but this situation is much different. We have everything you can think of, and made with some of the best materials in the entire kingdom. Would you like to take a look? The woman pressed. Annie took a nervous step backwards from the energetic woman. She must not like being around people that were so pushy and loud, but this could be a good opportunity for us. She would love to take a look at your wares, I said as I slipped some money into her pocket. Annie looked to me as if I were crazy, but I only nudged her shoulder towards the larger woman. We have a long trip ahead of us, and if this fine lady is willing to give you the best deals in the area, then maybe we can make a deal. A fine idea. Come along, dearie. Let me show you everything we have in stock. The woman exclaimed in glee as she pulled Annie into her shop, all along Annie giving me a look that promised payback. Chuckling at her expense, I looked up into the darkened sky above. As if on K, rain began to fall. Distant thunder rumbled as I placed my hood over my head just as the rain began to get heavy. The rain never bothered me much. If anything, it helped me clear my head of everything that was going on around me, including the pain from my past. Looking around, I saw a small cemetery across the street from the shop. A small black fence surrounded the graves and a black gate barely hung onto the hinges that held it up. Moving towards the gate, I counted about 7 graves, all military, laying within the confines of the fence. The cemetery was mismanaged, with tall grass and weeds coming up to my knees. Puddles of water pooled themselves here and there as I read each of the tombstones, but it was the last grave, in the corner of the cemetery, that made me stop. Laying on top of the grass in front of the tombstone was an old dog with golden fur. She had her head propped on top of her front paws with her eyes closed, as if to simply bask in the presence of the one that laid beneath her. The rain fell down, turning her once golden fur into a dark orange. I knew what had happened, but it didn't make it any easier in my eyes. Walking over until I was standing next to the dog, I read off the name of the soldier that was buried beneath. Survey Corps. Lifting my arm above the dog so that part of my cloak was above her body, the golden glanced up to me for a moment before resting her head back down onto her wet forearms. I didn't move, and nothing needed to be translated between us. She had lost someone dear to her, and if shielding her from the rain helped ease her conscience, if just a small insurmountable bit, then it would be worth it. We stayed like this for a while, my arm simply acting as a temporary shelter for the poor animal. It must have been 15 minutes later when I noticed that she was no longer breathing, but I remained like this still, shielding the once beautiful dog from the harshness of the weather. You know, not all humans wanted to fight, I said to the new visitor to the cemetery. Some of us just want to go home to our friends and family. To the place where we could feel safe and secure. Annie stared at the scene in front of her with that emotionless face, but I could feel the sadness underneath. A vortex of emotions swirled inside her in a way that she has never felt before. She was wearing a dark green cloak that went down to her ankles with a hood that covered her head from the rain. The cloak was large enough to cover her 3D maneuver gear as well. Without another word, Annie left the cemetery, but I remained by the deceased dog's side. It wasn't right to leave her like this, so I began forming hand seals. Kaden, Kako Tatsuzan. The dog beneath me burst into flames before quickly burning away, bones and all. The ashes slowly sunk into the mud below, just how I imagined the old girl would have wanted. Go, protect your friend in the afterlife just as you did in this one. With that I turned and left the cemetery. XXXXX. This doesn't make any sense, Irvin said as he looked to each of the people in the room. A rectangle table sat at the center of the room, with a few of chairs being occupied by people. Levi was looking out the window behind Irvin while everyone looked lost. The others that were in the room with the two was Armin, Hange, and Petra. The angel of death attacked you and captured Annie. I thought he was staying with the pious family right now. He looked over to Petra, who was standing by the door, but her hair was covering her face. She looked dead, angry, sad, a mixture of all three. His question was directed to her, but it was clear to everyone in the room that she was having an internal conflict with herself right now. Yes, Eric was supposed to be overseeing his protection when Darius sent Petra back to us. So either he let him go freely, or Naruto escaped, which wouldn't be too hard if everyone thought you couldn't move properly. Hange said as she leaned back into her chair. Setting aside the fact that he's actually walking again, and the fact that he can breathe fire, why would he attack us? I thought we were on the same side. I thought so too, but I guess we were wrong. Irvin said as he sat down in his chair at the head of the table. How are Ren and Mikasa doing, Armin? They're fine. Just need some rest after what happened. Armin said as he returned to his thoughts. It doesn't make any sense. The four people in the room looked over to the where Petra was standing. All that time I spent with him, was it all a lie? Did he fake the entire thing? Everyone stared at her in silence. She was the one that had spent the most time with the mysterious man, and when she returned she looked both sad that she had to leave him and happy with the time they had spent together. He may have been quiet and distant, but he was so nice on the inside. It was like he actually cared for those around him. I don't think that it was a lie, Petra. Armin said, his gaze fixated on the table in front of him. The woman looked over at Armin, along with everyone else in the room. What do you mean? Irvin asked. Everything he's done up until this point has only helped humanity, right? Armin said, making his commander nod. Why would he suddenly just change his ways and support the enemy? There has to be a deeper meaning to his actions. Any ideas? Irvin asked. Quote. Armin continued looking at the table as he racked his brain for any ideas. The boy wanted so desperately to believe that Naruto was not an enemy, but what if he was? The commander sighed as he stroked his hand through his hair. Why was being the man in charge so difficult sometimes? Did the committee have anything to say? Hange asked after another extended period of silence. The only noise coming from the soft patter of rain against the window and the rumble of distant thunder. Plenty, Irvin answered, but at least we showed them the threat that these Titan shifters posed. In the end that was one of the main purposes of our operation. What are we going to do now? Levi asked, his eyes still staring out the window. The men are all preparing to move towards the supposed breach in the southern wall. Can we really afford to send men to give chase to Naruto and the female Titan? If we're going to go after them, everyone looked to Petra as she spoke. Then I better be on the team that goes. As much as I would love to send a team after them, if the breach in the southern wall is true then we have a larger problem on our hands. Irvin said, with all due respect sir. Petra said, making the man look at her in question. Petra has never gone against direct orders, especially from Irvin. If we let them wander about inside the walls then they could cause even more problems down the line. Dealing with them now, before they can regroup, is the best option at the moment sir. Do you have a plan then? Irvin asked. Let me lead a small team, maybe just 3 or 4 of us, to track them down. Petra said, and do you believe that you can take them? This is the angel of death and female Titan we're talking about here. Hange questioned. Of course not, but if we can find them then we should be able to keep them under surveillance long enough until reinforcements can arrive. Petra explained. But what if reinforcements never come? Levi asked. Petra looked at her commanding officer in question. If the southern wall is truly breached like we believe it to be then everyone, including you, will be needed on the front lines. You're one of the most experienced soldiers we have, and that experience will be needed on the battlefield. Not chasing a man that may or may not pose a threat later down the line. Unfortunately I'm going to have to agree with Levi. All our resources are going to have to be funneled towards the possible breach. Irvin said before shaking his head as something else came to mind. What a horrible time for this happen. The garrison just started a massive operation against a Grey stronghold as well. They're going to be split between dealing with this new Titan threat while also fighting the Greys inside the walls. Petra was shaking when her plan was shut down by her superiors. Without another word she left the room. Armin watched as she left with clenched teeth. He wanted to say something to calm his fellow soldier, but he needed to be sure before trying to make an excuse for what Naruto did. Think she'll be okay. She became fairly close to Naruto during her stay with the guy. Hange said, Petra will be fine. She's a soldier and won my best. She'll follow orders, no matter how much she hates them. Levi stated. I'll trust your insight then, Levi. For now we have other matters to attend to. Irvin stated. XXXXX. So that's what you can do while in Titan form. I commented as I stared up at the blonde Titan. The rain continued to fall heavily down upon us, but we were covered by a thick layer of tree limbs. We had entered a swamp, and just off the beaten path there was a small clearing in which was deemed safe enough to rest. We had silently traveled towards the southeast part of the kingdom, towards a town named Essen. There I would meet my contact and move on to the area where the information was being safeguarded. Before moving on, however, I wanted to see what Annie could do. To see the extent of her power so I could correctly gauge how she would be in battle. To put it plainly, I was impressed. While in Titan form, Annie's speed could nearly match my own. This was due to the increase in muscle mass while in her Titan form. Her defense was also incredible because of her ability to harden any part of her body at will, but a nimble and knowledgeable fighter could slip past her defenses. Annie released her Titan form and fell to the wet ground below. The carcass of the Titan fell backwards into the swamp and subsequently steamed up into the air. This is all I know how to do. But you have amazing control, which is a stark improvement when compared to Ren. Annie looked down towards ground when he heard his name. I lost against him though. You lost against him, and the entire Survey Corps. A group of humans that have more experience fighting Titans than nearly any other group. I stated as I placed a hand onto her shoulder. She looked up to me with appreciation in her eyes. You did well for what was placed in front of you. Thanks, Annie responded as I removed my hand and walked to the edge of the water. Now, it's only fair that I reveal some of my secrets to you. Annie watched as I walked out onto the water without falling in. Call it magic if you want, but for now you should know that I can walk on water, run up objects, and jump very high. I stated before turning towards the shocked girl. But the real thing I wanted to show you was this. Running through some hand signs, I ended with a tiger seal and breathed in deeply. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. A massive fireball appeared in front of me before shooting off into the swamp beyond. Turning towards my companion, Annie looked shocked. How? I know I saw you use some lightning thing before, but to create fire from nothing, Annie said with wide eyes. Is it really magic? Shrugging my shoulders, I walked back over to the murky ground so I wouldn't need to stand on the water. It would just be easier to call it magic. Annie gave me a strange look, making me chuckle. If I were to explain everything then we'd be here for a very long time and I don't want to be stuck in this rain any longer than I have to. Annie looked to the ground for a moment, making me look at her in curiosity. Anything on your mind? Why are you trusting me? Annie asked. I could turn on you at any moment. The same reason you're trusting me. We still don't know if we can completely trust each other. Annie was still unconvinced, making me sigh. Look, I know you're still trying to figure your life out. You were brainwashed and lost all your memories of your past. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but I'm not here to judge you. If you want to talk then just say so, otherwise I'll let you keep to yourself. Thanks, Annie responded with a slight smile. Not a problem. Now let's get moving. We're nearly at the rendezvous point. Who are we meeting up with, and why all the way out in the southeast swamps? We're meeting up with a contact of the Greys who will help us get the information that they hold. As to why we're meeting all the way out here, I'm just as clueless as you are. I said as we began moving down the muddy path. The rain had let up somewhat, but a drizzle still fell from the skies. Don't trust them. No, and neither should you. I don't, but they all can't be that bad. What do you mean? They did point me towards you when the scouts were capturing you. Annie's eyes widened at my words. So the Greys, in a way, saved your life. Yes, Annie quieted down, making me softly chuckle at her realization. She may not trust humans, but maybe she'll treat some of the Greys slightly better than the rest. For another hour we walked quietly down the path that weaved through the swamplands. Every now and again we would pass a person who looked at us like we were some alien from a far-off land. These people must not be used to visitors due to their location near the wall and swampland surroundings. Finally reaching our destination at the heart of the swamps, a small town emerged from the thick low-hanging trees and endless insect-infested water. The buildings looked extremely old when compared to every other town that I've traveled through. Wooden planks from the waterlogged trees around the town made up the walls for most of the buildings. Some of the buildings were two-storied, but most consisted of only a single floor. Lights shone from the windows of the various buildings as we walked down the wet dirt road that made up this town's main street. This place is disgusting, Annie stated. There wasn't anyone out and about because of the rain that had fallen before, but one thing I've noticed was the lack of military presence while we were traveling here. It does seem a little run down, but I doubt these people care. I'm sure they have more important things to worry about, I replied as we stopped in front of one of the few two-story buildings. On the other side of the door I could hear loud laughter and the stomping of feet. What could that be? I grinned as I opened the door. The thick stench of alcohol and tobacco smoke attacked our noses. Music from a band on a small stage complemented the loud laughter and dancing from nearly everyone in the room. Every table near the dance floor was packed with people drinking and smoking. Drinking, of course. Annie gave me an annoyed look, making me chuckle. A small bar with 6 seats rested on the opposite side of the room with a cute younger lady standing behind it. One of the seats near the wall was taken by a man with a gray coat. A rifle leaned against the wall next to him with a gray fedora hanging off the top. Follow me, I said as I closed the door behind us and walked towards the bar, Annie staying close behind me. After walking past a few people, each of who gave us strange looks, I sat next to the man at the bar. What'll ya have? The barkeep asked with a very obvious accent. Get 'em the house whiskey. The man next to me said, his voice deep and rough around the edges. The girl nodded her head before leaving us. Annie remained standing behind me with an expressionless face. Welp, I'm glad ya found your way here, Angel Boy. Essen ain't the most hospitable place for outsiders like yourself. It was the same man that decided against killing that night. I got that feeling when we first entered the swamp. I responded as he took sip of his liquor. The people here are very independent. You could say that. People round here don't much enjoy the company of some fancy noble or high-strung military folk. Essen's been known for standing up to the big man, and since this swamp is out of the way and not worth much in terms of crops, they tend to leave us alone. The man then looked over his shoulder towards Annie before returning his gaze to the back of the bar. Looks like you completed your mission just like what was asked of ya. I try my best, I responded as a glass of brown liquid was placed in front of me. Taking a sip of the liquor, it burned its way down my throat in a satisfactory manner. And you even kept her alive. Bold move, Mr. Angel. She trustworthy. About as trustworthy as you are. The man erupted into laughter at my response. Annie looked confused, but also clearly appreciated my comment. Wise words if I ever heard any. It was now that I saw a revolver strapped to his belt. Mostly concealed by his coat, however. The weapon was certainly beautiful and looked different from the weapons that the military used. Custom made like his rifle perhaps. The name's James, and this is my birthplace. He held out his hand, which I firmly grasped and shook. Naruto. Oh, I know all about you. Part of the mission and all. James replied before another sip of whiskey slipped down his throat. So, what made ya want to work with the Greys anyway? Thought you were gonna be the noble's personal bitch or something. Didn't take to having a leash too much. Decided to get out of that situation as fast as I could. And keep fighting the Titans. Thought you were gonna find a little place to settle down. I will after the Titans are gone. Guess we all have to fight 'em in our own way. I raised my glass towards him. Truer words have never been spoken. He grinned and we toasted our drinks. After a few moments of just listening to the band play and people dance, I decided to press our conversation. So I've heard that the Greys have some information on the Titans that may be of use to me. Oh yeah, it's at the base just east of here. On the edge of the swamp leading towards Trost, but I'm gonna have to warn ya the stuff you'll find is all sorts of crazy. When I gave him a strange look, James could only laugh. You'll see when we get there. I've been ordered to escort ya, so you two better get comfortable with me for a little while. James finished off his whiskey and placed the glass near the edge of the table where it was quickly refilled by the barkeep. He looked over at Annie and sighed before looking back to his glass. Sit down, girl. Ain't nobody gonna attack ya here. Annie glared at the back of James' head for a moment before looking to me. I shrugged and motioned to the stool next to me. Fine, Annie whispered to herself. The blonde sat down in the stool and remained quiet. Not much of a talker, is she? James commented. I can relate somewhat. I'm not much of a talker either. True, but there be a difference between quiet and paranoid. We are being hunted down by the military. Join the club, but that don't stop me from going to the bar and having a few drinks. Can't argue that logic. I took another large sip of the whiskey. In truth, I didn't really feel like arguing with the man, at least not here. Is your leader stationed at the base we're going to? Should be, but ya never know with her. She tends to like to leave when something happens. When are we going to leave? James looked down at his glass, then turned towards the window. Could leave now. I can see your little pet don't like this place too much. Annie sent a glare at James that could freeze any human on earth, except James was far from your average person. He laughed at the look he was given and drank the rest of his alcohol, with me following closely behind. Anyways, if we leave now we could make it to the base before sunset. James stood from his seat, with Annie and I following his lead. He placed his hat onto his head and slung his rifle around his shoulders. It was now, as he was brandishing his 3D maneuver gear, that I could fully take in just how normal he looked. He wasn't a big muscle guy, or extremely small. Just normal, except for his eyes. I could tell that he was a hunter just by the way he looked around the room. He had brown hair with a beard and mustache. James had the tan skin of someone who was outdoors all day, and blue eyes much like Annie's and my own. If I had to guess his age, then maybe late 20s, early 30s. Sounds good. Let's get moving. The three of us moved towards the door, but then I realized I had to pay for my drink. Before I could say anything, however, James yelled something to the bartender. Put his on my tab. When you gonna pay that off? It's starting to pile up again. Yeah, I'll get to it after I get done with a mission or something. You better. James opened the door allowing us to exit the old musty bar and out into the cloudy weather. The rain had stopped falling from the heavens, but decided to leave its gray clouds behind. The man rubbed the back of his head as he closed the door. Sisters. Can't live with M, can't live without M. It's around 2 in the afternoon. Do you think we can make it out of the swamp by then? I questioned. I take it y'all walked here. I nodded my head in the affirmative. Well, I took the liberty of getting us a few horses, but I only got 2. James looked to Annie before shrugging. Your pet's gonna have to ride with you. I'm going to kill you, Annie said with an angry voice, making James laugh loudly. Sure you're girly. Follow me to the stables, James said as he walked away. Annie was fuming under her hood. Can I kill him? Annie whispered. I heard that, James replied over his shoulder from down the street. Then stop being an ass. And I have a name. It's Annie, Annie replied as she followed after him. I chuckled at the scene. James may be loose-mouthed, but he was certainly entertaining if nothing else. XXXXX. Have I ever told you how much I hated the swamps? Annie voiced to nobody in particular. We were coming close to the edge of the swamps, meaning the base must be fast approaching. The gray clouds still lingered above, making the afternoon sky darker than normal. The horses were currently being fed by James as we took our final break before arriving at the base nearly 5 minutes away. Calm down, flower girl. We getting close to the base, James said, making her clench her hands. I'm going to kill him. Annie said to herself. I placed a hand onto her shoulder, calming the hybrid from any more dangerous thoughts. I liked it more when it was just us. But we really didn't talk that much. I replied as I removed my hand from her shoulder. I know, but at least you respect me as a person. Not some pet. Annie looked to James, who was busy caring for the horses. You know he's only joking. It's still annoying. Annie sighed before turning to me with eyes that I've rarely seen from her. They looked soft. He'll be leaving when we get what we need from them, right? Should be. Once they give me what I've earned, then we'll be on our way. Good, because he's Angel Boy, get over here. James shouted by the horses. Annie looked even more annoyed, but James sounded serious. Walking over to the mercenary, I furrowed my brows when the 2 horses came galloping by back towards Essen. He was kneeling down with his hand lightly touching the ground below. We stood next to him for a moment before he stood up straight with his rifle in his hands. We're gonna walk the rest of the way. And the reason? I asked. There's rubblein in the ground. Rubblein only artillery makes, James said as he began walking down the narrow path. Artillery? You mean those cannons the military uses up on the walls? Yup, except, we don't have many of those, and especially out here in the swamps. Which means, the military is attacking your base. I said in annoyance. Of all the times for the military to attack the Greys, why now? Yeah, I find it strange too. Why with the supposed breach and all? James said. Breach? Annie questioned. Yeah, you don't know about it. Figured you'd be in on the loop with you being a hybrid. Annie looked away in anger as she thought of the implications that this could have. No, I don't know anything about another breach. I never knew anything, Annie said, anger flowing through her body as she remembered her position within their group. Just a pawn in someone's big game of chess. That's a damn shame. Could have used some insider information on those folks. It was now that the distant rumble of explosions could be heard. The swamp had slowly transitioned into low-hanging trees and tall grass as high as our knees. The path that we once followed disappeared into said tall grass, meaning we were completely reliant on James to guide us to the Grey's base. You best put your problems on hold for now, flower girl. Those military guys could be. Just as the words left his mouth, 4 people swooped down in front of us. It was garrison troops wielding pistols that looked completely different from James. Halt. You are now entering a war zone. One of the soldiers shouted with pistols drawn. Annie was about to burst into action, but halted her actions when she saw me motion for her to calm herself. Please turn around and, wait. Are you? He must have noticed James' garments and was slowly piecing the information together. What was probably throwing them off was the inclusion of Annie and myself being with him. Now hold up there, fellas. We were only passing through. You wouldn't mind if we just. James said as he raised his hands up in fake surrender. You're a captain for the Greys. What are you doing here with these 2? The man shouted as they all pointed their weapons at us. This ain't gonna end well, is it? When James didn't get a response, he sighed and slowly lowered his hand towards his revolver. Guess not. They stayed like this for what felt like several minutes. The 4 men simply pointing their weapons at James, and said Gray hovering his hand over his sidearm. Sorry fellas, but we've got some place to be. In the blink of an eye, James had taken his weapon from its holster and fired 4 bullets. The 4 soldiers dropped to the ground with a bullet hole in each of their heads. The speed of which he did all of those actions was astounding. Even Annie looked amazed. We best keep moving. That was probably just a scouting party for our rear defenses, he said as he twirled his revolver around his finger before sliding it back into his holster. So a quick shot and a sniper. Lead the way, I responded. James nodded and we were once again walking through the tall grass after he loaded 4 golden canisters into his weapon. Where is this base of yours? It has to be close, Annie commented, but James grinned as he had us all stop in what appeared to be a small clearing. The explosions were loud, very loud, and the crackling of gunfire could be heard now as well. A different type of war was being fought here within the walls. Hold your horses, little missy. We ain't gonna show up through the main entrance. If we done do that, then every soldier would be shooting at us, and unlike you 2, I ain't got no way to go all freako. James said as he knelt down and opened a wooden hatch in the ground which was hidden by the tall grass. Follow my lead. My friends are gonna be on edge with all the fighting going on. James then hopped into the hole. I looked to Annie, who shrugged, but I could tell that she did not want to go down into a place where she couldn't turn into a titan. Placing a reassuring hand onto her shoulder, I followed James into the hatch with Annie close behind, shutting the hatch once she was in. It was completely dark at the bottom, but the tunnel was large enough for 2 fully grown men to walk past one another without bumping into each other. A distant oil-fueled lamp could be seen at the end of the tunnel with a thick wooden door sitting next to it. Wooden crossbeams held up the dirt from caving in, but the wood looked old and decayed. Y'all comin'. James was already halfway to the door. Walking after the swamp boy, we made it to the door in short fashion. The rumble of artillery was shaking the dirt above, making me worry about a potential cave-in. James knocked on the door as hard as he could. They never really check this door much, James commented as he waited for someone to answer. After what felt like an eternity, someone finally answered back. Password. A voice yelled back. Password. I ain't got no password, Chuck. Just open the damn door. James responded in annoyance. Well, I can't let you in without a password. Chuck responded. You know damn well that they change those things every other day. How am I supposed to remember something so long? James shouted. Annie and I looked at one another in confusion. This exchange was strange. Well, you best not have any military with you or we're screwed, Chuck said as he unlocked and opened the door. The man on the other side wore a gray uniform much like James, but without the red marks on his hat and coat. He had 3D maneuver gear with 2 pistols much like the military had before. I guess nobody else has the weapons that James custom made himself. He must even make the bullets himself as well. If the military captured me, then you know damn well that I would have gone down fightin'. James said as he smacked the back of Chuck's head while we walked in. And who are these two? Chuck asked as he closed door behind us. The inside of the room was smaller than I would have expected. It only had room for a single wooden chair, but 3 hallways split off from the small room. A single lantern hung from center of the ceiling, giving light to an otherwise dark room. Our guest, now get back to watchin' or I'll report you to the commander myself. James said as he walked down the center hallway with Annie and I close behind. We wormed our way through the labyrinth of 6-foot tunnels. Every now and again we would see several other people running by to separate parts of the base, none of them sparing even a glance towards us. Why were these people still here? What was so important? We're coming up on the main mission room. Boss lady will fill you in from there. We walked into a room that was about 10 feet high. It looked like any military headquarters, with plenty of people running around in panic and one calm-looking individual standing over a round table in the center of the room. We walked up to the table to see a map of the area on top of the table with gray and brown figurines on top. The brown figurines outnumbered the gray ones 3-1. Brought em here just like you asked, boss lady. James said as we approached the woman that looked over the map. She was about my height with red hair that reached down to her midsection. Her uniform was gray with black markings on them instead of red, but her hat sat off to the side to show her purple eyes. The boss lady, as James keeps calling her, glanced over to us then back to the map below. I see. Good job, James, she stated simply as she continued staring back at the map for a moment. We stood like this for a few more seconds before she turned towards us with piercing eyes. She's tough, that much couldn't be understated. My name is Lara and I'm the commander of the Greys. Lara said as she held out a hand, which I accepted firmly. And you must be the angel of death. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Uzumaki. I nodded my head at her comment. She's done her homework. Lara then looked to Annie, her eyes narrowing. And you must be the hybrid that's killed so many people. Annie didn't respond, instead hiding her gaze beneath her hood much like myself. The leader of the Greys then returned her gaze to me. I see you decided to keep her alive. A strange decision, and a bad one if I do think so myself, but it was yours to choose. I fulfilled my end of the bargain, now it's your turn. I said, straight to business. If you say so, Mr. Uzumaki, but we have problem. Lara said as she returned her gaze to the map below. The garrison is pressing us hard and if they keep this up the perimeter will fall. And why does this concern me at all? It was mean, heartless even, but I only came for the information on the Titans. What became of this base, or the Greys after my business with them was done, had little to do with me. I figured you'd say that, but the information you seek isn't a file, or thing I can give you. It's a place. What do you mean? I was told that your spies knew something about the Titans from the military. Not a place. Really, I'm not sure about any of that. The place in question I'll have to explain more in detail later, but if this base falls. Lara was conning me into helping her defend this base. To fight the very people that I wanted to help, but if this place really could help me learn the origins of the Titans and if it was here, fine, I'll help. What do you need of me? Good. This attack is being led by Riko Brzezinska. Lara said as she pointed to the map. A broad line could be seen with brown artillery figures being fixed outside the edge of the swamp in the center of a massive plains. A single star sat behind the artillery figures, showing where their headquarters was located. From here she coordinates her men and dictates where the artillery will fire. We are being pressed from 2 sides and are slowly losing ground because of how accurate the artillery is. If one of the lines falls then we will be completely surrounded. The front looked like a horseshoe, and if one line breaks then the house of cards collapses. How they were holding on for this long was a miracle. And if that happens then I'll lose a third of my troops within these walls. Something I cannot afford. I stared at the star for a moment, contemplating who exactly it represented. I've heard of your crazy magical powers, but if you can force them to retreat or call a ceasefire then that would suffice. Make them stop their advance so you can have time to see what's down there yourself. Once then we'll be able to pull out and destroy the base afterwards. Is it really that big? I questioned. It was now that I realized that the reason Lara was having her men fight so hard to defend this base was hold up their end of the bargain. To give me this very chance to see what was hidden below. Not sure, but whatever's down there, a chill ran up Lara's spine at the thought. We're going to have to bury it once you're done so nobody else can see it. And how do you know this is connected to the Titans? Because when you go into that place you feel like you're surrounded by Titans. I don't know how to explain it, but you certainly know how that feels. When a Titan is near something and you feels off. Lara explained, but I could tell she was off put by her experience. Also, there was things down there that, I don't know. I know that feeling all too well. While I enjoy hearing you two speak about those crazy things down there we have more important matters that need dealing with. James said. You're right. James moved to the southern flank and support the men stationed there as best you can. Hybrid, I want you to. I don't take orders from you. Annie said, her eyes gleaming with rage. She did not appreciate Lara's earlier comments on how I should have killed her. Lara stared at her with equally as hardened eyes. I think it would be best if Annie came with me. I said. Lara sighed and looked to me once more. Fine, do what you can to stop the garrison's advance. Kill a lot, or destroy their artillery. Do whatever works, just make them stop their attack for at least a couple of hours. Lara clearly didn't like being told off, especially by someone who could be a potential enemy. If you can do that then that should give us enough time to scuttle the base and remove any wounded from the battlefield. We'll get them to stop. Come on Annie, I said as one of the soldiers led us towards the exit that we originally came from. Chuck stood by the door with key in hand. Going back out there, Chuck asked as he unlocked the door and opened the way for us. We walked past him and into the hallway. Good luck out there. Let's hope that all those rumors about you two are true. He closed the thick door behind us, leaving us to ourselves once more. I don't trust them. They're hiding something, Annie said as we began walking down the tunnel towards the hatch from which we came. If what the map said was correct, we just needed to head west for about 5 minutes towards the front line that hugged the edge of the tree line. From there it's a wide open field towards the artillery battery. We all are, Annie. You're no different. I thought I was hiding things, Annie said with a stern voice as I looked up to the hatch above. The only way up was the use of 3D maneuver gear, it would seem. But you know damn well that everything I thought I was hiding was a lie. Then who are your hybrid friends? If everything you thought you knew was a lie, then you can tell me at least that. Annie frowned as the words left my mouth. I sighed at her expression before jumping up to the hatch above. Fine. If you don't wish to tell me, then so be it. As I pressed against the hatch, Annie stopped me when 2 wires connected next to me. The blonde girl flew up to me and stopped very close to my face. There wasn't much room within archway leading up. I'll tell you, after we finish our business with the Greys. My expression shouted that I didn't believe her, only making her eyes harden when she spoke next. I promise you, I'll tell you who they are. Why would you tell me then? Because I want to trust you. You're the only one I can even think about trusting now. The only one that will have my back if something happens, and if paying for that trust means betraying the ones that brainwashed me, then I would happily oblige. I felt the determination in each of the words that left her mouth. Annie truly wanted me to trust her and vice versa. Then if you follow through with your words, then I'll trust you with something as well. It would only be fair, right? Annie questioned with a genuine smile adoring her features. I grinned back at her as I shoved the hatch open. All too true. XXXXX. Commander Rico, I have a report from Southern Assault Force. A man shouted as he approached the silver-haired woman. The senior soldier looked to the man with a curious expression. They were currently standing in a tent behind a line of bunkered artillery and riflemen. Out here, where there are no trees to use 3D maneuver gear, and the combination of artillery and rifles made it impossible for the Greys to attack them directly. Because of this, Rico decided on a wide sweeping attack to surround the base before attacking on all fronts. The base's location also restricted any enemy movement that would hamper her flanking advancing forces by way of counterflanks. This, of course, would mean any frontal attack was impossible, as her own troops would be picked off if they advanced towards the tree line. And that would be? Rico asked. So far the operation has been moving along smoothly, albeit slowly due to the area of which the Greys have situated themselves in. Progress has slowed due to an increase in casualties from sniper fire. Until they learn the whereabouts of the sniper, they are currently halted. When they learn of his location, then report it back to us. We will hit him with everything we got. The man nodded and left. Rico turned to another man who was looking down at the map while moving pieces around said map. How is the northern attack force going? Slow. Our troops have encountered a riverbed here, the man said as he pointed towards the Blue River. It is exposing our troops to rifle fire while also shielding the Greys from artillery fire. It will take some time for us to push them off the other side. I see, but they are nearly completely surrounded. About 70% of the way, Rico said with a sigh as she looked to the top of the tent. Annoyed, the officer asked, we shouldn't be here. There are Titans to our rear being handled by Ian and Mitabi, but we should be there fighting them, not here attacking the Greys. Rico said, clear annoyance laced within her voice. I know, but if we don't attack them now, if we lose to the Titans behind us, then this doesn't matter anyway. Rico exclaimed as she slammed her fist into the table, knocking several pieces over in the process. I know this wasn't what Commander Pixis wanted, that his hands are tied, but still. Orders are orders, the man stated before another soldier entered the tent, sweat rolling down his face with heavy breathing. What's the matter, soldier? The man went for another breath of air before looking towards the two in shock. The angel, he's here. Rico's eyes widened in shock. Naruto, he's here. Without another word, she exited the tent towards the barricade that her forward troops were using for cover. Rico, wait, we need to come up with a. She didn't hear another word as she walked past her artillery until finally reaching her desired destination. Looking out over the plains towards the tree line, she spotted who she was looking for on the edge of said tree line. Naruto, Rico said once more to herself, then to the men pointing rifles at him from behind the barricade. It was growing dark with each passing moment, and the gray clouds above only meant darker conditions was coming even faster than she would have liked. The two seemed to stare at one another for what seemed like an eternity as Rico did her best to grasp the situation at hand. Why was Naruto here? Why was he positioned in a defensive manner for the Greys? Why did he betray us? Commander, what do we do? One of the soldiers holding a rifle asked. The artillery had stopped firing into the forest and was now aiming at the man standing across from them. Rico looked to the soldier who asked the question, and to her surprise his weapon was shaking in his hand. They had all heard the rumors of what the Angel of Death could do, but they never actually saw him in action. Never seen the aftermath of his destructive power. Granted, Rico has never seen him action to the extent of Pixis, but she's seen the aftermath and what he's done while she was with him. If he attacked them with that level of vigor like he did in Trost, then, Commander. The Angel began walking towards the barricade at a slow pace, only making the line of soldiers more anxious. Commander, everyone, ready your weapons and prepare to fire. The officer from the tent shouted from behind Rico, who looked lost in thought, her hair covering her eyes from view. Naruto continued to walk slowly towards them, seemingly uncaring to the fact that so many weapons were pointed against him. Steady, wait, Rico whispered, but nobody heard her. She knew, deep down, that if they began firing then people were going to die. Her soldiers were going to die. The officer shouted, but before he could finish a massive tree flew out of the tree line and smashed into one of the 7 artillery pieces. By this time Naruto had begun forming hand seals, his eyes still fixated on the silver-haired woman. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu. Breathing in heavily, the black-cloaked figure released a massive fireball towards the barricade. It smashed into the meter-high wall, bursting into flames upon contact. Another tree came flying over the angel and into another artillery piece. What came after was chaos. Soldiers began dropping their weapons and running while officers did their best to control the situation. Another fireball collided with the wall, only causing more disarray to ensue, but Riko remained still. The final nail in the coffin was when a titan, the female titan, appeared from the tree line with 2 trees in each of her hands ready to throw them at whatever target she deemed necessary. Screams and shouts of her appearance, mixed with the angel of deaths, was just too much. Riko jumped down from the barricade and began walking towards the one that saved them from a titan invasion. It felt as if time had slowed down for the silver-haired garrison soldier. In front of her was the hero of Trost, the very person she thought would help save humanity from the titans. In front of her was the person she believed gave his strength to give humanity to gain their first victory over the titans. In front of her was the person that betrayed them and saved the female titan from the scouting corps plans. What this person was, who this person was, and what his goals are, remained a mystery. The elite garrison soldier thought she knew, at least a sliver, of who Naruto Uzumaki was and what he wanted to accomplish. But now, she stopped in front of the man she had once protected, her hair still covering her eyes from view. Hello. One word. It was all that came from his mouth after what he did back in Stohes. Traitor, Riko whispered, but the black-garbed man remained silent. If I could kill you right now then I would in a heartbeat. She then looked up into the darkness underneath his hood with such anger that even Pixis would quiver. The mystery of a man remained unfazed by the hatred that his former bodyguard showed, instead deciding to remain silent like always. I thought you wanted to help humanity. To retake Wall Maria. Retaking Wall Maria was never one of my goals. Riko's expression turned from anger, to shock and dismay. That wall means nothing to me. Then what is your goal? What is your purpose for being here? The man frowned at her words before shaking his head. In time. For now tell your men to halt their advance. The Greys want a ceasefire. And why are you working with them? They're an enemy to the military just as much as the female titan is. None of this makes any sense. Riko, the soldier looked to the cloaked man in annoyance. When you were my bodyguard, did you feel that I would turn on humanity? Quote. Did you feel that you would need to kill me because I posed a threat to you or your precious walls? These walls are what keep us alive. True, but while your goal is to retake Wall Maria, mine coincides with yours more than you can ever believe. Then what are your goals? What is the purpose of teaming up with the female titan? By now her men had managed to calm down and were now pointing their weapons at the pair. Naruto shook his head with a sigh. Tell your men to halt their advance. The Greys have something I want and if you keep attacking then I will be forced to fight alongside them. Riko clenched her teeth in annoyance. Whatever his goals are, they still remained a mystery to her. The female titan, the Greys, it doesn't make any sense, but he didn't attack her on sight which was strange. Maybe there is something going on behind the scenes. Fine, I'll call my men off. I'd rather be fighting the titans inside the walls anyway. Naruto furrowed his brow at this, but decided not to pursue that dialogue. Obviously since she's here it means that it's not as bad as it would seem, at least he hoped. Tell Pixis hello for me. Naruto said while Riko motioned for her men to lower their weapons. If what you say about your goals are true, then I hope you can tell him that yourself on friendlier terms. Riko said over her shoulder. I hope so as well, Naruto muttered as he turned and began walking towards the tree line where Annie stood. XXXXX. That went better than expected, Annie said as we walked through the tunnel that we had initially left. It was dark out, and the fighting had stopped for the time being. Whether or not Riko would continue her attack later remained to be seen. I was surprised that she didn't attack me on sight. Annie looked at me in confusion. Riko was one of the 3 bodyguards assigned to protect me when we were traveling to the capital. So you two have history. Somewhat, I said as I banged on the door. But she seems to still trust me to a degree. Or was scared of what would have happened if I really wanted to fight them. If shooting fire out of your mouth wasn't already scary enough, the door opened to reveal James, who held a massive grin on his face. Well, if it ain't the heroes themselves. I figured you'd be coming this way so I decided to come let y'all in. James said as he stood aside, allowing us to walk in. Damn fine work you two did up there. Didn't expect ya to talk em down like ya did. Killing isn't always the answer. I replied as we walked down the tunnel towards where we had initially met Lara. Unless it has to be. James stated as he ran his hand over his revolver. How many soldiers did he kill in the last hour or so? 1, 10, 50. I'm sure if I asked him then he could tell me the exact amount. The faces they made when he pulled the trigger of his rifle. James may seem like the uncaring type, but I could tell that this was just a facade. We entered the main room where we originally met Lara, only to see an empty table and a lonely commander. It would seem that most of her men have retreated from the base except for the bare minimum of men needed to hold the doors. The redhead turned to us and smiled. Very well done. The garrison have halted their attack, giving us time to retreat from the area and lick our wounds. Lara approached me and extended a hand, which I took. Not a problem. Now on to business. Follow me and I'll show you the entrance of the dungeon. Lara said as the 4 of us began walking through the labyrinth of tunnels, all leading deeper into the base. Dungeon, Annie questioned. I could tell that she was already extremely nervous about being in such a confined space. Not being able to turn into a titan when she deemed it necessary was very unnerving for the girl. Yes, a dungeon. A place that I personally sanctioned off so nobody could enter unless I gave the go-ahead. Lara replied as the tunnels were beginning to grow smaller and smaller with each step. How did you come upon this place? I questioned. We found this place while we were expanding the base. It was completely by chance that our men found this place. And why is it sectioned off from everyone else? Annie asked. I'll let you two learn that for yourself. Lara said. As we walked further down into the ground, I looked over at James and could see a bead of sweat running down his forehead. James, I said, making the man look over at me with curious eyes. Have you been in this place before? Yeah, I have, and I ain't wantin' to back down there if I can help it. James replied. We've only sent one scouting team down there consisting of 15 men since we found it. Lara explained as she grabbed a lantern off the wall and continued walking. Of those 15 men, only 3 came back alive. And I take it James was one of those men? Annie questioned, gaining a nod from the man in question. Who are the other 2 people? One of the people killed themselves after about 3 days of hallucination. The third, Lara then pointed towards herself, is right in front of you. Before we could even see the entrance of the dungeon, James's grip on his revolver tightened. We're coming up on the place. I can feel it from here. James said. It was true. A strange feeling was washing over us from the end of the tunnel. This feeling, why did it feel so familiar? My head was beginning to pound in pain. And here we are, the entrance to the dungeon. Lara said as the 4 of us stopped in front of what looked to be a hole in the ground. The edges were made of stone, and were cracked with vines growing through them. Here you may find the answers that you seek. How far did you get? I asked. Not too sure, but not very far. All I know is that we came running back when things you hear out of a horror story came crawling out of the dark corners. James said. I must warn you that we don't have long. The garrison can attack at any moment, and when they do, we're destroying this place. If you don't want to be trapped down there forever, then I suggest you quickly run through the place and leave. Lara warned. Then we best leave then. I responded as I looked at Annie, only for her eyes to convey fear. Annie. She shook her head and turned towards me. I'm ready. My eyes lingered with hers for another moment before nodding my head. Good luck down there, you two. Lara said. Don't go messing around. Find what ya need and get the hell out. Ain't no reason for sightseeing. James commented. Will do. Let's go. I said as Annie and I jumped down into the hole. XXXXX. The fall didn't take very long. A few seconds if I had to guess the approximate time, but as we fell it felt all intrusive. Like I was falling into the mouth of a titan. I landed onto the uneven cobblestone ground. The only light coming from around 20 lit candles sitting on the ground near an open door and the strange-looking vines that protruded out of the cobblestone walls. Taking a step forward, Annie soon landed where I once stood. What Lara said was right. The feeling of being surrounded by titans blanketed me at all times, but there was something else. It was subtle, but something else was definitely down here. Something dark and evil. This place feels strange, Annie commented as she looked around the room. The vines were glowing a very dim shade of red. The blonde girl ran her hand over the vines, but they didn't respond. I approached the vines as well and ran my hand over them, only for the plants to light up somewhat. A chill then ran up my spine as pain protruded into my head. I don't like this place. Annie only looked at me in curiosity. The room we were currently in was small with only a single door leading into what looked to be another room. A single stick stuck up from the ground with a dark lantern hanging from the end. It didn't look to have the ability to hold oil, that's for sure. Neither do I. What are we even looking for down here? Annie asked as I moved towards the door, running my hand over the lantern as I passed. A strange white flickered to life inside the lantern for just a moment before it returned to darkness. What was this feeling? Don't lose yourself to the hunt. We must rid this world of these foul beasts lest they kill us all. A man exclaimed as 20 men and women walked through the door in front of us. Remember, let nothing live. Everything that is tainted must burn. Naruto. I snapped back to reality and looked to the now hoodless girl. Her eyes were showing worry and fear. It was then that I realized that the Kyuubi's chakra had seeped into eyes, making them glow underneath my hood. Shaking my head, I released the chakra from my eyes and returned them to their normal blue. What was that? The demons of my past. Let's get moving, I said as I pressed through the door. Annie stared at my back for a moment before shaking her head and following me. Whatever that was, hopefully it wouldn't be a problem in the future. I entered the first room only to see a massive tunnel system that went from side to side. It was large enough for even Annie to become a titan and move around freely. Down one end a massive cave-in blocked our path, and down the other a thick mist blocked our view from seeing how deep this tunnel goes. A single lit lantern hung from the wall next to the door, but the only light from inside the tunnel was the dim red vines around us. We stood in the doorway for a moment, contemplating what to do next. A soft echo bounced off the walls coming from the thick mist. This place is creepy, Naruto-kun. The black shade exclaimed as we walked into the tunnel, but not into the mist. I stepped into a puddle, making me look down. Ew, is that blood? I bent down and looked at the crimson liquid. It was certainly blood. Found a couple of the grays. Annie said from the caved-in part of the tunnel. 2 gray-coated soldiers was stained across the rock and dirt that made up the new, caved-in wall. 7 rats the size of large dogs surrounded the 2 grays. I sighed and looked up into the air above. The red light was only making this place more ominous. Annie then looked to me in slight worry. We're going into that mist, aren't we? Don't have much of choice. Stick close to me, I said as I moved towards the mist with Annie at my side. We moved slowly through the mist, trying our best to pick anything out that could pose a threat, but after several minutes of walking a rumble in the ground gave us pause. Like a heavy footstep pressed against the muddy ground, another rumble soon followed after the first. It sounds like Annie went to say, but the heavy footsteps were becoming faster. Titan, I finished. Just as the words left my mouth, a titan, about the height of Annie's titan form, came charging out of the mist towards me. I jumped to the side, narrowly dodging the monster's charge. Looking over at the beast, I could barely see the creature through the mist, but I could tell it was very different from a normal titan. Its skin was rotting from his body and he had long dirty silver hair. His right forearm was replaced with a large club while his right was replaced with a massive scythe. 6 large spikes were embedded into his back with chains hanging from each of these spikes. On the ends of these chains were hooks similar to my own. What's a Titan doing down here? Annie asked to nobody in particular. I wish I could give her an answer, but I truly didn't know what was going on in this place. Everything felt so familiar, but completely unknown at the same time. Wow, that thing looks creepy. Are these the things that you've been playing with, Naruto-kun? The black shade asked as she appeared next to me once more. Before I could respond, the beast attacked us, sending its scythe at Annie, who was just barely able to dodge out of the way. His eyes landed on me, and for just a moment eyes of recognition appeared before he continued his assault on my companion. It looks like he knows you. Do you know who, or what, this thing is? No, I don't, I responded as I began releasing my hooks. And I don't much care. Of course you don't, you aren't the same, you know that. I frowned at her words, but I shook my head. Tell that to someone who cares. With that I moved towards the beast, but stopped when a hand was placed onto my shoulder. I looked over to see the crimson and white eyes reflecting sadness. Look at what you've become. Where is the happy Uzumaki that I fell in love with? He would have. Shut up. Stop talking to me like you know everything. You know nothing. My eyes turned a bright red from the influence of the Kyuubi's chakra flowing into my body. After everything I've been through. Everything that this god-forsaken mission has put me through. Nothing's the same. I have lost everything. My life, my memories, my loved ones. Everything. I took a step towards the now terrified shade, who took a cautious step backwards. And here you appear, trying to lecture me on who I used to be. Well, let me tell you something about this past me. He is dead, along with the grief and sorrow that went along with those bonds that he had. The shade was in shock at the words that left my mouth. Now leave me be. Disappear back to the part of my madness that actually stays silent. With that I turned and began walking towards the fight between Annie, who had turned into a Titan, and the strange weaponized Titan, my anger building with each and every step I took towards the fighting pair. Forming hand signs as I walked, chakra continued to build up within my body. Jinten. Boruto Saji. Just as Annie blocked an attack from the side with a hardened forearm, the wind around them shoved Annie backwards. Cuts appeared all over the strange-looking Titan while lightning spears shot through the beast. In the blink of an eye the creature was on the ground bleeding out from the attack with a cloaked man standing near his head. Annie simply stared at the poor creature in shock, then to the black-garbed man. She had heard Naruto, but in her eyes there was nobody else there. Just him. You know me, don't you? I asked to the creature, who was slowly regenerating from the attack. The Titan's eyes stared into mine, as if confirming my question. This thing knew me, but how? I don't remember what this was, or how an abomination so far underground could ever know who I was. My subconscious, however, was screaming at me to kill this thing, but why? Then you will die. A clone appeared over the creature, his spinning hook slicing out the chunk behind his neck. Killing it instantly. Naruto. I turned to see Annie, now out of her Titan shell, looking at me in fear and concern. My eyes were still glowing a bright red with my pupils being slits. Remember when I said that I'd reveal some of my secrets once this was all over? Annie nodded her head ever so cautiously at my words. When I do, I feel that you will be presented with a choice. I began walking away into the mist, my hooks dragging behind me as I went. Harden yourself, my young companion, because I feel the choices that will present themselves will place a heavy burden on you if you choose to follow them. Annie could only stare as I disappeared into the mist, leaving her imagination to revel on the words that I spoke. The secrets of this dungeon, however, did not only scare her, but me as well. Because I knew, in the depths of my decaying mind, that it was no accident that I felt so familiar with this place. XXXXX. This chapter was probably one of the hardest chapters to write out of all of them. It's darker than the other chapters, but the darkness that blankets Naruto's past needed to be shown. The beginning section was actually a lot more graphic, but I toned it down so it wouldn't be as bad. I also want everyone to know that this story has been changed from a rating of T to a rating of M. A few of the scenes were rather dark. Because of this I want to play it safe and bump up the rating. It may be unnecessary, and if enough people comment that it can return, then I'll return it at that time. Until then I don't want this story to be taken down because of this. Let me know if it's safe for T, or if it needs to stay M. On another note, the ending of the latest chapter of Attack on Titan kind of blows this story out of the water. So I'm going to pretend like it never happened and continue on with the train of thought that we were all originally led to believe. Also, I was wondering why Attack on Titan and Shingeki no Kyojin were different sections. Why aren't they all under the same section? I don't know, it confuses me. I'm sorry for the long wait, and I hope everyone enjoys this chapter of Lost One. I love every one of you, and, as always, thank you for your continued patience. Pixis sat above the now repaired gate of Trost, drinking from his flask as he looked out over the field held by the Titans. The scarred land beyond was clearly evident by the massive craters and charred grass. It was here that the commander of the southern garrison witnessed the slaughter of hundreds of Titans in the blink of an eye. The Angel of Death, and now the female Titan. What are your orders, Commander? Rico asked, still saluting the sitting man. Pixis was still lost in thought as to what was going on in that black-garbed man's mind. Why would he save the female Titan? Why would he work with the Greys? Pixis didn't believe that Naruto would go against humanity without a very good reason. Even then, if the Angel of Death wanted to, he would be able to tear down these walls and kill many along the way. Pixis's eyes hovered the craters in the field below, further proving his theory. The older man was grateful that nobody else watched the carnage in the fields besides himself. If they had, then Naruto would be viewed in a very different light right now. Sir, you say the angel, along with the female titan, are currently residing at the Gray's base in the southern swamps. Pixis questioned once more. And they are working together, yes. Rico responded. He forced us to retreat when they emerged from the forest. Did you attempt to engage? Number. Pixis chuckled as he took a sip of his beverage. Smart move. Where are your men now? They're reinforcing the eastern bulkheads in an attempt to slow down any titan advance, but there doesn't seem to be any massive waves. Was there really a breach? Pixis let the wind wash over them as he thought of what to say next. No, there hasn't been one, but Aren has been captured by 2 more hybrids. The Scouting Legion, along with some military police, are giving chase to them now. What about the titans still inside the wall? Where did they come from? When you return to your post, I want you to begin sweeping the area for any stragglers that may still be within the walls. As for where they came from, still unknown. And what of Naruto? What are we going to do about him? Pixis knew that he was in the best position to confront the man that seemingly betrayed them, but we'll leave him be for the time being. What? But that's an order, Rico. Focus on the titans within the walls. We'll come up with a plan to deal with Naruto afterwards. The silver-haired soldier paused before nodding her head. Her commander was right. The titans needed to be dealt with first, then they could focus their efforts elsewhere. Good. Now go kill some titans. I'll be waiting for you when the 3 of you finish your assignments at hand. Don't keep me waiting too long. Sir. Yes, sir, Rico said before turning and leaving. Pixis sighed as he returned his gaze to the field beyond. He could only hope that his gut instinct about Naruto was correct. Otherwise humanity would be paying a fatal price. XXXXX. I walked through the dark mist, Annie following behind me at a safe distance. She was scared of the madness that continued to rake my mind. That was her first experience with my past, and it must have surprised her. Unlike her own blank past, it would seem that mine wanted to haunt me to no end. The sound of our boots sinking in and out of the muddy ground was the only sound that could heard between us. Your words hurt me, Naruto-kun. My teeth ground together in annoyance. Why wouldn't she just leave me alone? You remembered part of my past, didn't you? That's not fair. You can't remember one part of me without remembering the other. Shut up, I said, making my blonde companion look at me in confusion. Did you say something? Annie asked. No, just thinking out loud. I replied, but the shade seemed upset at this. What? So you'll talk to her, but not me? That's just cruel, Naruto-kun. I said shut up. Why are you even here? I shouted back, making Annie and the shade jump at the harshness of my voice. Because I love you, the shade responded. No you don't. You don't love me. You can't. You're just a figment of my imagination. The shade seemed to grow smaller at my words. If you really loved me then you'd still be here. That doesn't change. Naruto. I looked back at a somewhat scared Annie. Her eyes were wide and she wasn't moving. Quote. Who are you talking to? I released a low growl before looking over to where the shade once stood. She was gone, hidden within the confines of my subconscious. I turned and continued walking into the mist. This couldn't be an ongoing thing. I need to keep this thing caged, lest it completely drives me insane. Annie decided not to pursue the question as another rumble could be heard deeper into the mist. Brandishing my hooks, a massive mouth about half the size of the titan before, one that would be seen at the end of Leech, protruded out in an attempt to eat me. Jumping back, I latched the hooks onto the inside of its mouth as I moved backwards. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu, I voiced within my mind as I ran through the hand seals and releasing a fireball towards its mouth. The leech attempted to close its mouth, but I applied lightning to my chains, numbing its jaw and forcing it to leave its mouth open. The fireball entered its mouth and exploded in the creature's stomach, but the leech remained alive. Before I could continue my attack, however, Annie appeared next to it in her titan form with a hardened fist. It fell down onto its back, splitting the creature in two and sending dark purple blood spraying all over us. Walking up to the dead creature, I removed my hooks from the inside of its mouth and glanced up at Annie, who was looking at me in concern. More rumbles could be heard as I began looking around. At the edge of the blanket of mist 6 more leech-like creatures could be seen poised to strike. Gripping my hooks tighter, I positioned myself next to Annie just as the monsters attacked us. XXXXX. I don't know if we should do this. What if something happens to you? I have never done this before and anything, and I mean anything, can happen. I said as I looked over my notes. But if it does work then you will have a powerful tool at your disposal. Even if you can only use it once then it should be enough to turn the tide in your favor. The older man said as he moved towards the center of the circle. Around him were seal upon seal etched into the ground in a circle with a single red and black scroll opened up in front of him. Yes, I know what the implications are, but what about you? The reward far outweigh the risks, Naruto. The older man smiled as he sat down at the epicenter of the massive seal. You have suffered so much since agreeing to watch over our world. This small task is minuscule compared to what you will have to endure. I frowned as I stared at the older man. No matter what happens, you will always be my best friend. From now until the end of time. Always remember that. Nodding my head, I activated the seals that surrounded my friend, and I watched as they began to glow a dark red. His body began to steam as the seals went to work on their described tasks. Are you okay? It looked like it was beginning to hurt. I'm fine. Just keep going no matter what. I frowned as the light from the seals began to glow brighter and brighter, forcing me to cover my eyes. Then a scream of pain erupted from the epicenter of the light, making me wince at the heartbreaking sound. Keep going, no matter what. Finally the screams ended, and soon after the jutsu was complete. Slowly I lowered my arm, but my eyes widened in shock at what appeared before me. The scroll had been completed, but my best friend. Falling to my knees, I stared down at him in utter shock. Was the scroll truly worth the price that was paid? XXXXX. Annie stared at the flickering flames as they danced in front of her eyes. Its orange glow bouncing off the walls, giving light to the otherwise dark room. How long has it been since they've entered this godforsaken place? It has felt like an eternity, but in reality it has probably only been a day or two. She has since lost track of time once they entered this dungeon, and since entering the creatures they've had to kill have made chills run up her spine. Spiders and rats the size of bears. More weaponized titans, all of whom seem to recognize her silent companion. Beasts made of fire and sludge that would only be heard of in the nightmare stories of youth. These beasts all changed from what she could only guess was a titan at one point. Her eyes rose to the man that has stayed silent since his feat of madness at the beginning of their descent. The blonde hybrid was, for the first time since traveling with the man, worried about his health. It was clear that Naruto's past was painful. Without knowing anything about him, Annie could tell that his life was shattered, torn apart even, by forces that eluded her. What sat before her, silent and ever observant of the dancing flame, was a broken man trying to help humanity with what remained of his sanity. Much like herself, Naruto seemed to have lost his grasp on who he was, but images were plaguing him unlike her. Pulling her knees closer to her chest, Annie continued to stare at the man. She wanted so desperately to know more about the cloaked man. The urge to get closer to him was only growing stronger as they traversed these dark caverns, but she knew that it would have to wait. Wait until they could leave this horrid place. Taking in a shaken breath, the girl's eyes looked over his appearance. Covered from head to toe in crimson blood, Naruto seemed unfazed by the fact that his cloak was drenched in the life force of the creatures that they've slain. The blood was slowly steaming away, but it takes a much longer time for this blood to disappear, compared to the titans on the surface. This only pushed her theory that the creatures in this dungeon were created by the same means as all the other titans. Naruto. The man slowly looked over to the girl, who shrunk slightly under his intense gaze. Quote. What was she about to say or ask? What she wanted to do was comfort him in the same way he did her. To show the same kindness that he showed her, but how? She has never cared about someone in such a way before. Where would she even begin? Has he been ignoring the voice that he talked to when they first entered this place? It would explain why he was so quiet. Naruto's eyes lingered for a brief moment before returning to the fire before them. She could tell they were about to move once again. This was probably the third time they've rested in a small room such as this and made camp around a small fire with whatever rations Naruto had within his bag. Each time they spent their time in silence, contemplating their own issues. Her companions, however, seemed to be much more serious than her own at the moment. Standing up, Annie moved towards the angel and sat down next to him, his eyes following her as she did so. She wasn't good with words, and she wasn't good at expressing her feelings, but I don't know what is happening here. I don't know what these creatures are, or how they are all connected to you. Annie then looked up into the veil that covered his eyes, trying her best to convey her feelings as best she could. But I want you to know that, no matter what happens, I won't be going anywhere. I'll have your back as long as you have mine. We'll fix our pasts, together. Why was she saying this? Annie wasn't even sure if she could trust him, but for some reason she felt comfortable when she was in his presence. Like no matter what, through hell and back, Naruto would always keep a promise. The man stared down at the girl, slight taken aback by her bold words. He apparently wasn't expecting her to say that. His even mouth twitched upwards ever so slightly before nodding his head. You're right, we'll get through this, together. This, for some reason, made Annie smile. No matter the hardships, or the horrors that awaited them, they would stick together. XXXXX. Are you sure this is the right way? Annie whispered as we slowly crept through a tunnel that had glowing red roots running along the walls. Said roots were beginning to glow brighter and brighter as we moved deeper into the rather small cavern. After giving her a funny look, the uncomfortable titan shifter sighed. Of course you don't. These things may recognize me, but that doesn't mean I remember exactly how to navigate this place. I responded as we came upon an old double door. The wood was decayed, but still held firm due to the iron hinges along its side. Its design was plain with no visible decorations to be seen. This door seems smaller than what I expected. Annie commented as she looked it over. Expected something bigger. After everything I've seen, it's a relief to see a door so small. After running my hand along the wood, I pressed against the door and opening the gateway into the next room. The room was pitch black with only 4 glowing purple pillars standing near the corners of the room. My eyes danced along the pillars as convoluted memories pressed themselves against my head. Can you sense anything? Not really, but those pillars feel strange. They're giving off some sort of. I said as we slowly walked into the room, but then something exploded in my head. A sharp pain followed by a soothing warmth blanketed my thoughts. I fell to my knees as I tried to repress this feeling from completely taking over, but I couldn't stop its progress. Naruto. I heard Annie say as my mind began to drift. Naru. XXXXX. My eyes opened to see a creature standing in front of me. It had a single massive eye and no mouth that I could see. Its blue skin was complemented by a dirty white robe that covered up the remainder of its small body. The creature came up to my hip in height and looked as if it could never win in a physical fight. Around us was a dark musty library filled with old books and scrolls on many different topics. The tiny creature hummed out a noise as it looked me over with its single eye. Your eyes are different than before. I furrowed a brow at this. But your mind is still in pain about a clouded past. Interesting. The creature stumbled towards me as it picked up a notepad that sat on a stack of books close by. Tearing out the scribbled pages on the notepad, the creature found an empty page and produced a pen from inside its robe. Care to share? Who are you? So you don't remember who I am? The creature scribbled something down onto the notepad before returning its gaze to me. My name is Yosefka after my mother. Although I doubt you'll remember her either. Given your unstable position. Tell me, how much do you remember? What do you mean? Your memories. How far back do they go? And why should I tell you? Because I only want to learn about your past, and maybe help you remember who you are. Was a better diagnosis from the looks of it. I stared at the creature for a time before answering. This place is an imprisonment seal. Yes, and you put me here. I've been trapped here for 300 years, and the only way you're getting out of here is if you help me. You know how to get out of here. Isofka nodded his head. Then why haven't you left? Why would I? This place has everything I could ever want. You did a very good job in providing everything I asked for. He said as he ran his small hand along the books that lined the wall. But, there is one thing that isn't here amongst my endless racks of books, and that's you. If you were so curious, then why didn't I tell you before? Because those memories were too badly damaged due to decay to get anything useful. The human mind will purposefully forget or block certain memories in an attempt to protect you from going insane. This happens naturally without you even recognizing that it is happening. Isofka explained. Apparently he knows that I'm very old, so I must have divulged in him at least that much. Only the most important information would have been retained after such a long time. What is it that you want to know? I carefully inquired. I want to know what you did during your time alive that shaped our world. The certain points in time that brought the world to an apex in change. Isofka said as his eye finally set on me. And maybe we can learn a little about you as well. I remained silent as he continued. If you do this, then I will let you through this room without raising a finger. I knew that, despite his stature, that Isofka was immensely powerful. Within this seal he was akin to a god, and I didn't need another enemy within a dungeon of creatures all wishing to tear me apart. Fine, let's see what we can learn, but only if you keep what you find a secret. Of course, who else is there to tell? So, how are we going to do this? You said that my mind was severely decayed. How are we going to learn of my childhood? That is the case, but now something is different. You see, now we have a catalyst that could possibly bridge the gap. And that would be, I'm not sure, but it's originating from your stomach. Whatever it is, it must have had some impact on your past. Well, you were the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Right, in any case, Isofka continued, regaining my attention. This energy inside you should help regain some of the memories of your past and then hopefully some more further on down the timeline. Whether or not we can obtain everything is doubtful at best, but we should at least gain some knowledge of your early years. Nodding my head, the creature known as Isofka sat down in front of me with myself following suit. Okay, so what I want you to do is close your eyes and try to think of something important that you did when you were younger. From my end, along with the energy inside you, we should be able to recreate some of your past. Before I could respond, two wet suction cups clasped onto my temples and the world around us melted. XXXXXFB1. So this is the first time you've shaped your world? Isofka asked as we floated down towards a massive crater in the ground surrounded by destroyed buildings and dead bodies. Where are we? I don't really remember. Then information began to trickle into my mind of the place we were floating down towards. This was my home. Isofka scribbled down some more onto his notepad as we finally landed atop a gate overlooking the shambled entrance of the village. So what did you do? I defeated someone that had destroyed my home, and managed to convince him to bring the people he killed back to life. We watched as a large crowd had formed below us and were all eagerly awaiting for someone to return. He brought people back to life. His name was Nagatoy if I remember correctly, and yes. He did. Fascinating. The creature began to scribble some more down onto his notepad when suddenly they heard cheers from below. The two looked down and saw a single blonde approaching the gate. I assume that would be. That is me, yes. Today was the day that people actually began to look at me differently. The day people saw me as a human being. I watched as I was hugged tightly by a pink-haired girl as she cried onto my shoulder. Interesting. Let us continue, Isofka said, but stopped when he saw me simply staring down at the group. What is it? I just can't remember their names. These people all know me, but I can't remember who they were. It would seem that whatever energy we're using as a catalyst can only recreate events and not the people. Isofka theorized. Or maybe it's you don't want to remember. I looked at him in confusion. Remember, your mind is always actively trying to protect you. It's possible your mind is pushing the memories of your past friends away in an attempt to save you from any more emotional trauma because, like a floodgate, once you remember their names it will all come flooding back in. But what about the painful memories that have already come back? Some things manage to slip through the cracks. I'm sure there will be some things we will see that will hurt you coming up. You're human, making your mind imperfect. It's only trying to do its best. I returned my gaze to the cheering below. Isofka was probably right. No matter how much I wanted to remember these people, it was probably best that they remained a mystery. Now let's continue on. I'm sure there is much more to see. Without a word the world around us once again melted away. XXXXXFB2. You've told me about chakra and how it works, but this. Isofka said as he looked around the area. The world was moving along at a semi-fast pace and 4 combatants could be seen fighting a single woman with white hair with 3 eyes. The one-eyed creature stood in awe as he witnessed the sheer destructive power of the jutsu being thrown around. I had no idea it could manifest itself into something so destructive. This is the place that we fought against Kagaya, who was the very first of us to properly wield chakra, as can you see before you. I stated, ignoring Isofka's comments. The first of you chakra wielders. What was her purpose in returning? She wanted to enslave humanity and put them in an infinite dream world. We fought her and won using all our strength, but the world around them sped up drastically until they were now watching a purple samurai and an orange fox smash into each other over a massive lake. My final fight was against someone with completely opposing ideals than my own. Once the immediate threat of being enslaved was solved, there was one last obstacle to overcome. What were the ideals being fought over? Isofka asked as we watched the two forces clash against one another. My opponent believed that he alone could shoulder all the hate in the world and then fade into darkness, taking all the hate with him and destroying it completely. My eyes then moved towards myself and they narrowed somewhat. While I believed that everyone could come together and work towards a brighter future. I assume you won. I nodded my head as the battle came to a close. Did the world turn out like you envisioned? I certainly hope not. XXXXXFB3. We reappeared within a room completely bleached in white. Where are we? I'm not sure, but this is the place where I agreed to live as long as I have. I replied as we looked over to see me standing in front of a floating man with black balls hovering behind him. It was this day that 9 of my friends sacrificed themselves to give me a chance to fight a darkness that was going to wipe out humanity. Are the Titans this menace of which you speak? Probably, but I'm not sure. I can only hope it's soon as the Titans are slowly gaining ground on the remaining humans. I responded as I watched as my past self argued with the floating old man. I wonder what it would have been like if I refused this mission and lived my life normally. How would things have changed if I was taken out of the picture of all the future events that I played a major role in? How interesting, Isofka said as he scribbled some more onto his notepad. So you agreed to live eternally because you wanted to protect the world from a coming darkness. Noted. Let's continue. It would seem that Isofka was only interested in what actually happened and not why it happened. This was good because I could barely remember the reason why anymore. XXXXXFB4. Get on your knees. What a horrid position to be in, Isofka said as he observed the situation. This was the time where my family was murdered in front of me. Quote. Those people in the image are your wife and children, correct? Isofka asked as he ran his hand through the image of the people in front of me. Indeed, they were just images projected before my past self. He looked over towards me, but found that I wasn't going to answer. Right, this memory must be particularly painful. The creature noted that in earlier memories that the past blonde was very happy and carefree. He would run in without a second thought and not think of the consequences. Unfortunately, even though the man before him was probably one of the most powerful people in the world, this short-sightedness finally caught up to him. The masked man took advantage of this weakness, and used it to finish his masterpiece. Can we please? I voiced, not wanting to stay here as I watched the man walk over to the small girl on the table. Sure, XXXXXFB5. How can you hope to defeat me? I've finally evolved my eyes to a point that no other shinobi can ever hope to match me. Now that those beasts are sealed away, you are just an average ninja. A man with glowing blue eyes exclaimed as he laughed hysterically. You killed her, I said as I kneeled before the crumpled form of a woman in her mid-40s. Her hair was black with natural pink highlights on the end of her shoulder-length hair. It was happening again. I fell in love again and now. Of course I killed her. Her puny dujutsu could never compare to my own. His mouth twisted into an evil grin as a thought came to his mind. And once I'm finished with you, I'm going after your children next. Something in me snapped as I approached a pillar of fire in my mind and a sudden surge of chakra spread throughout my body. I softly whispered as I stood up from my kneeling. What did you say? I can barely hear you. I said slightly louder, but then I quickly looked over at the man with different eyes. My right eye was now a shade of yellow and my left a shade of green. I'm going to smear the world with your blood. With that I dashed towards the now stunned Hyuga. I stared at the scene before us as my past self went on the offensive. This was all new to me, but my heart still hurt just as much as it did before. So someone managed to convince me to love again, only for it to be shattered in my hands once more. To arrive to the scene of your wife being killed again, Isofka stated, reminding me that he was here in the first place. He now saw why my disposition has changed so radically, and so did I. Was this why I was so distant now? Why the furnace in my heart went cold? I'm beginning to understand now. Let's see if we can continue further. I didn't respond. My heart was breaking even further for a reason that disappeared from my mind. I loved her with all my heart, and seeing her dead. XXXXXFB6 first person from past Naruto. I can't really remember the last time I've slept. A week, 2 weeks, a month. Breathing in the crisp night air of autumn, my eyes sat fixated on the massive tree in front of me. It clearly stood above all the other surrounding trees by leaps and bounds. The blue moon reflected its sunlight onto the earth, giving an almost surreal feeling. A cold wind blew across the golden grass that surrounded the massive tree, swaying my gray cloak in the breeze as well. Behind the tree was a sheer drop into the ocean where the soft laps of water onto boulders could be heard. Tonight was the night that my plan would finally reach its end. For the last 3 years I've been desperately putting the pieces together, racing against time to prove to it that an alternative could be found. Of course, this compromise that I had managed to barely cobble together did not go over well in the elemental nations. The 5 great cages, along with their respective councils, saw it as a plot to destroy the very thing they held most dear, but it was either this or the even worse alternative. Sighing, I felt the presence of several chakra signatures approaching from the woods on the opposite side of the golden clearing. At every turn I've been opposed by the combined efforts of the allied nations, not that I could blame them. What I was doing, what was going to happen regardless of the outcome tonight, was seen as stripping away their deep-rooted traditions and power. I could only hope that everyone would eventually forgive me for this, or at the very least forget. I was beginning to wonder if a group would find me before midnight. I said aloud to the newly arrived group, my back still facing them. There was 4 of them, and they were all from Konoha. You had me worried. Shut your damn mouth, you crazed lunatic. One of the females of the group said. Sighing, I turned my body to the 4 young adults. They were between the ages of 15 and 17. The one that had spoken had black hair and onyx eyes, meaning she held the blood of an old acquaintance of mine. She wore the Uchiha garb that I remember Sarada wearing in her early days. Rai was her name, and she hated me with a burning passion. I don't blame her, after what happened to her family. Don't get so fired up, Rai. This is him that we're talking about. Another female said with concerned eyes. A member of the Hyuga clan, the clear eyes devoid of any pupils clearly marked her as a part of the famous clan. Wearing clothing that reminded me of, my eyes narrowed when I saw her short hair. Let her, Aiya. This bastard deserves all the ridicule that he's shoved onto himself. The third person of the group said with a menacing grin. He had silver hair with turquoise eyes. His name was Koji Hataki and a prodigy in his own right. But what about, Aiya said, looking over to the fourth member of their group. My eyes finally drifted to the last of their group, and I frowned at the sight. A girl, with black hair with blonde highlights on the end stood off to the side. She had onyx eyes and wore a black sleeveless kunoichi garb. The last of the group, and one of my biggest regrets. Hiojiazan, the girl said, her hair shading her eyes as she trembled. Tears nearly came to my eyes as I stared back at my great-granddaughter, but luckily the hood that covered my head shielded this from the group. I knew her name. She was my great-granddaughter, how couldn't I? But seeing her here, now, hurt more than any blade ever could. Her name was Kazuo Uzumaki, and I loved her dearly. Why? I didn't have a great answer. I was barred as a traitor to the Hidden Leaf village, along with every other village, once I came to them with my plan. Hardly anyone was willing to support me, not even my own family. So, I then had to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life, and disown my family so they wouldn't be caught with the backlash of my choices over the past 3 years. Because he's crazy, Kazu. You, of all people, should know that. Rai replied venomously, but Kazu wasn't convinced as she stared me down. Since leaving my family 3 years prior, Kazu has been the only one trying to bring me back to how I was. To show me the correct path and bring her beloved grandfather home, but this was something that I could not waver on. He's not crazy, Kazu shot back, anger evident in her eyes. Hiojiazan has always had a reason for everything he's done, and that still hasn't changed. She still thought she could change me, after 3 years of chasing and fighting me. I'm so sorry, Kazu. Oh, has he now? So he had a reason for sitting back and watching as my entire family was killed. Rai shouted back, her once onyx eyes morphing into a shape that I haven't seen for many years. The Mangekyo Sharingan. It had 6 black outreaching points that violently cut to the right at a 90-degree angle at the very ends. Kazu became quiet as she looked to the ground in sadness. This isn't the time to be arguing, you two. Aiya said, keeping her eyes trained on me as she talked. Aiya's right. Naruto is allowing us to argue so we have less time to take him down. Koji said as his hands tightened into fists. I raised an eyebrow at the group as they finally figured it out. All I needed to do was wait until the effects of the seals I placed around the world connected to the tree. After this happens, then there will be no stopping it. The only way to stop this process is to either force me to destroy one of the many seals, or kill me. Looking up at the positioning of the moon, I would say they didn't have long before they all connected. I'm going to kill him and avenge my family. If it's the last thing I do. Rai said before walking towards me, extending a blade out in front of her as she did so. You remind me so much of Sasuke, it almost hurts, I whispered, but her eyes visibly narrowed when I said this. Don't you dare speak of him. Not after you've forsaken us. Rai shouted before sprinting towards me. Rai, wait, Kazu shouted, but the Uchiha was too blinded by her rage to hear my great-granddaughter. I stared back at Rai's Mangekyo Sharingan with uncaring eyes. I knew what those eyes could do and what abilities they held. Every one of them held something different, an ability that marked them as a unique shinobi. I wonder what hers was. It was then that I felt a chill run down my spine. I then saw Rai's left eye begin to stress itself, making me frown slightly. That's one of your abilities. Just as I thought this, the world around me melted away into a black and white world. The ground was black and the sky a pure white. So you have the Tsukuyomi embedded into those eyes of yours. I said, before a blade pierced through the back of my shoulder. Never flinching, I looked behind me as she prepared another blade. Why am I not surprised? Do not speak to me as if you already knew. I've been preparing for this day ever since I learned you could have stopped my clan's destruction. Rai replied before shoving another blade into my back and out of my stomach. I assume that's what the Hokage and the council has told you. I replied, making the girl hesitate for a second before continuing her work of sticking blades into me. I thought so. Would you just shut your mouth and let me go? Rai was broken from her speech as I clasped a hand around her throat and lifted her up into the air. Maybe one day you'll learn the truth and throw away your ego, Uchiha. I said before erupting into nothing but smoke. Rai blinked and returned to reality, only to see my body erupt into smoke here as well, but as she neared the smoke of the destroyed cage bush and a fist emerged. There you are, the Uchiha exclaimed as she ducked and smashed a quickly formed Chidori into my body. I smiled as the body she connected her lightning jutsu with began to glow. So predictable, the clone said before exploding, sending the girl flying backwards towards her teammates. Her smoldering form finally stopped at the center of the field. Rai, Aiya exclaimed before rushing towards her friend. Kazu, along with Koji, appeared between myself and Rai with kunai drawn. As Aiya began healing Rai, a breeze from the nearby ocean blew away the smoke to reveal an unharmed gray-cloaked figure standing exactly where he stood before. I'll tell you this one final time. I said, my eyes moving to each one of them before continuing. The cages and their respective councils are lying to you. I'm not planning to. Shut your mouth, Koji said with a sneer, effectively cutting me off. We all know you're the one lying to us, to everyone. Do you really think that anyone would believe you? Especially now, after all you've done? I sighed and shook my head. When did everyone stop believing in me? When did my word become so meaningless? I suppose it doesn't matter now. After midnight tonight everything will be over and the world will move on to the next stage of its life. Not this again, Aya said, rolling her eyes. Like we're going to let you have your way. Then come at me. If you truly wish to cling to this world then come at me. I said, lowering my hood as I did so. Fine then, Kazu, let's buy Aya some time to heal Rai. Koji exclaimed as he dashed towards me. Kazu hesitated for a moment before following her comrade into battle. Koji shot a paper bomb strapped to a kunai at me, but I countered by throwing my own kunai at his. The two collided midair before exploding. I felt their chakra signatures split into two directions from behind the smoke made by the paper bomb. One underneath, and the other to my left. So he's using Earth style to dig underneath. Smart, but they still have much to learn. I began spinning chakra in my right hand just as Kazu erupted out of the smoke. In her hand was a similar spinning blue ball. She was the one that paid the closest attention to my teachings when I lived in our little compound in Konoha. To be able to use the Rasengan at the age of 16 without the help of Kage Bushin is extremely impressive. Rasengan, we both exclaimed, our jutsu colliding at the palms of our hands. Kazu's onyx eyes drilling into my blue ones before the explosion sent us both shooting backwards. Skidding to a halt, I barely had time to catch my bearings when two stone walls protruded up beside me and began shooting towards me at high speeds. On each of the stone slabs was a wall of explosive tags. Doden. Saramu Tatsuzan, I heard Koji say, my eyes narrowing as the walls came closer, but just as the walls were about to clamp shut an explosion erupted. Lightning poured out of the hole in the wall and at blinding speeds Koji was smashed in the stomach from a sharp kick, effectively digging him out of the dirt. The silver-haired boy was sent rocketing back towards Kazu, who stood wide-eyed at the sight. Behind me the two walls erupted into a massive explosion, sending debris every which way. Jinten. Boruto Saji, I had whispered under my breath. I doubt the others could hear me between the stone walls, but thinking fast, that was one of the less destructive jutsu I could have utilized to get out of the situation. How did you move so fast? Koji asked, a trail of blood dripping down from the corner of his mouth. It's his Jinten Kekai Genkai. Kazu said as the silver-haired boy stood up while wiping away the blood. It allows him to combine the lightning and wind elements to make swiftness. With it he is easily one of the fastest shinobi on the planet if he completes the hand signs for the jutsu. Kekai Genkai, then shouldn't you be able to use it too? Aya asked from across the field. No, natural Kekai Genkai are ones that people are born with and are easily able to obtain. Since Hioji-Izan has lived a very long life, due to the seal, he's been able to master both the wind and lightning elements through training alone. A normal person would never be able to obtain this because of old age, but with Hioji-Izan, Kazu explained. But even then there still needs to be an affinity for its combination within his blood. What did you do to obtain it? You never spoke of it back then. So how do we counter it? If he's so fast that our eyes can't track, how do we catch him? Koji asked. Kazu closed her eyes before breathing in sharply. Do you remember when you told me about my eyes, Hioji-Izan? Kazu asked, making me stare back at her emotionlessly. You said to never use them unless I absolutely had to and to never fall prey to the same curse as our brother clan. The young woman opened her eyes to reveal crimson red irises and 3 black spots circling them. I followed your words to the letter. Never using the Sharingan unless I was left no other choice. I began weaving my hands together, using the various forms to push together the lightning and wind chakra. I'm sorry, Oji-san. Jinten. Barindo Saraisu. I vanished from my place and nearly a second later I was to Kazu's right, but to my surprise she was looking at me with a kunai blocking my own. I blinked in surprise, but carried through with my momentum, pushing her away. Kazu landed several yards away, but she disappeared from my vision when Koji appeared between us breathing in heavily. Sweden. Ms. Oripa. The torrent of water smashed into me, sending me into the massive tree. That jutsu hurt a little more than what I was expecting, but I shrugged it off and looked at my grandchild and the Hataki. I was surprised that Kazu had managed to block my Jinten jutsu, so surprised that I left myself open to a counterattack. Righting myself, and brushing my cloak off from any water droplets that may have stuck to its surface, I looked at Kazu's Sharingan. I shouldn't have been surprised seeing her block it, seeing as how she has now activated those eyes. The ability to track movements, even those that happen within the span of a second, is the hallmark of the Sharingan's abilities, but what caught me off guard was how much strength she possessed when our kunai connected. Looks like she does have a bit of the Uzumaki blood in her. Where are the others? Surely they'd send more of you to stop the end of the world. I asked as Aya stood up with Rai. The others are still trying to deal with your friends. You know that. Koji spat with a confident grin. He must be feeling good of himself after landing that last jutsu on me. I hope nothing bad happens to them when this is all over. Are you finally ready to work with us, Rai? Kazu asked, her eyes trained on me while she talked. If we work together then we can take him down. Aya said with a nod of her own, her work on healing Rai completed as she did so. Fine, but only because we're on a time limit. If there wasn't one then I would eventually win. Rai said, then let's go with position delta. If he goes to use a Jinten jutsu then cover for your teammate Rai. Kazu shouted as she and Koji dashed to my left. I know, let's go Aya, Rai shouted before running to my right with the Hyuga. So they are keeping a Sharingan user with both of their teammates to predict my movements if I use a Jinten jutsu. Smart, looks like I'm going to have to change my fighting style. I grinned as chakra began spinning in my hand. Futon. Rasenshuriken. I then looked to Rai and Ayo before slinging the spinning ball of death towards them. The jutsu was flying towards its intended target before the other pair was upon me. Backpedaling, 2 kunai embedded themselves into the grass where I once stood. Koji landed above the kunai and swiftly sent one of the two embedded kunai towards me once again. I produced a kunai of my own from inside my cloak and blocked the projectile just as the explosion erupted from my Rasen shuriken. Undaunted by the explosion, Kazu grabbed the kunai that was in the air from being blocked by my own weapon and swung it down towards me, but her eyes widened when my kunai sliced through hers. Just as my wind-enhanced kunai was about to touch Kazu, my cloak began to burn from black flames, making me stutter my attack. Using this opportunity, Kazu slammed her foot into my chest and kicked me away. I stumbled backwards and looked over at where Rai and Aiya had once stood. Covered in a dark green chakra that resembled a skeleton, stood Rai and Aiya. Quickly pulling off my cloak, I tossed it to the side to reveal black clothes that vaguely resembled what the Anbu wore. My eyes narrowed as a droplet of blood spilled from Rai's right eye. So she can also use Amaterasu and the Susanoo. Her hate for me must burn deeply. Rai then began straining her right eye once more. Your Amaterasu won't work a second time, I said before dashing to the side. Black flames exploded behind me and followed me as I circled around the Uchiha. The black flames stopped as Rai fell to her knees, grabbing her right eye. Grasping the opportunity, I dashed towards the downed Uchiha, but Aiya jumped in between us. I've got you now, Hake Rokujuin Sho, Aiya shouted, her body dipping low as I neared. My eyes widened as the first two gentle fists pierced my left arm and shoulder. Gritting in pain, 4 more pierced my left shoulder and chest before I grabbed Aiya's throat with my right hand. Her assault immediately stopped as her hands clamped onto my arm. The pupilless eyes with veins pulsating around them stared back in shock. Surprised that I managed to retaliate so quickly. Expect the unexpected, little Hyuga, I said, venom laced in my voice as I said her last name. Throwing her away, Aiya slammed into Rai and the two collapsed to the ground. I can't move my left arm. Looks like I'll have to make do until my chakra pathways reconnect. Naruto, I looked over to Aiya, who was slowly standing up. What happened to your wife? My eyes narrowed at the mention of the person in question. You can't keep hating the Hyugas because of her death. It wasn't our fault that you. Shut your mouth, Hyuga. I know how my wife was killed. Not everyone in your clan are as righteous as you want to believe. I replied, my eyes cold and narrow. I had long given up on trying to root out the corruption within the Hyuga clan. Taking a step towards the two downed shinobi, my senses quickly picked up someone coming towards my right. Rasengan. My eyes landed onto the swirling ball of blue chakra, my own Rasengan forming in my functioning hand, but spinning in the opposite direction as hers. You still have much to learn, Kazu. I shouted as we slammed Rasengan against one another once more, but this time it had the opposite effect than what she was expecting. The two swirling balls of death evaporated as soon as they touched each other. Surprise evident in her eyes, she was unable to block my kick to her stomach, sending her backwards. Before I was able to follow up my attack, a rock spike erupted from the ground, making me jump to the side where a very angry Koji waited. You're mine, traitor, Koji exclaimed as he sent a punch towards my head, which I nimbly dodged. Sweeping one of my legs across the ground, Koji jumped up into the air and jabbed a kunai down towards my exposed leg. I quickly threw a kunai towards Koji's, making the trajectory of his kunai shove into the dirt just before my sweeping kick. Carrying through with my momentum, my leg swiped his hand away from the kunai that was now embedded into the dirt. Koji jumped backwards just as Kazu appeared to my left with Rai's sword drawn behind her. Leaping forward, I grabbed onto the kunai that was stuck into the ground and slammed it into the blade that was now bearing down onto me. Hake Kusho, an invisible crushing force smashed into my side, sending me flying across the field until finally my back hit the massive tree on the edge of the cliff. This tree keeps saving me from falling over the edge. I suppose I should be somewhat thankful. Thanks, Aiya. He was beginning to overpower me. Kazu said. Is Rai okay? She used her Mangekyo Sharingan too much and passed out from chakra exhaustion and the strain. She's still not used to using the Mangekyo Sharingan, Aiya said as she moved next to Kazu. How about you? That last kick looked pretty nasty, Koji said as he positioned himself on the other side of Kazu. It hurts, but I'll be fine. I've taken worse hits before, Kazu replied as she rubbed her stomach. Standing was hard, but I needed to live until the sealing process was complete. Let me lend you my aid, a voice in my head said softly. My eyes widened at the sound of the voice, but before I could respond, 2 tree limbs wrapped themselves around my head. You should be concentrating on the seal, not lending me your aid, I responded within my mind. If you die, then everything you've strived to accomplish will be for nothing, the voice said as chakra pushed itself into my eyes. And if you die, then I will return to my original plan. I don't think you would want that, now do you? I growled at the comment. The entire reason why I was going through this in the first place was because I wanted to avoid its original plan. Fine, if you insist. What are you giving me? You already know the answer to that question, the voice responded, more chakra pouring into my eyes. It felt like somebody was pouring lava into my eyes. But I'll only have time to transfer a single path and a single ability to you. What is it you desire? Thinking it over, I grinned at the applications this could provide. What in the world is the tree doing? Koji asked, a chill running down their spines. Aiya's eyes picked up that chakra was entering their enemy's eyes at a quick rate. I'm not sure, but there's a large amount of chakra going into Naruto's eyes, Aiya commented. Kazu's eyes narrowed before she readied her sword. Well, whatever it's doing, we can't let it complete its task. Let's go, Kazu exclaimed, dashing towards the tree. She was quickly upon me, the sword in her hand moving to pierce my chest. Just as it was about to press against my body, the blade stopped, as if it hit an invisible wall. A split second later and Kazu found herself flying backwards towards her teammates in shock. Just note that you will return this power to me. Do you understand? If you fail to do so, then, the voice said with a threatening tone. I understand, but this helps more than you ever know. I replied as the tree limbs slowly unraveled from my head. I looked over to the three with cold and uncaring eyes. Now there's you three. That's I impossible. Koji said, his eyes completely wide at what he saw. How can someone obtain that? Aiya asked, her hands beginning to tremble. Kazu's eyes were also wide in complete shock as the sword nearly fell from her hands. In the eyes of their opponent was the feared Rinne Sharingan. Did the tree give you those eyes, Hiojiazan? Kazu asked as they stared at the crimson eyes. There's no other way someone can just get those eyes over the course of a few minutes, let alone at all. In the past only 2 people have ever obtained that eye, and that was Madara Uchiha and Kagaya Otsutsuki. Even then they only had one on their forehead. It had to be the divine tree's doing. Isn't it obvious? The tree wants exactly what I want. I lied. The divine tree didn't actually care if I win or lose, but if my plan worked then it was a lot less of a hassle for it in the future. Now come, let me see what these eyes are capable of. Lifting my hand, I pointed my palm towards Aiya, and soon after the Hyuga began feeling the pull of gravity. Help! Aiya shouted as the pull became stronger, but before the others could reach her, Aiya was flying in the air towards me. Aiya, damn it, come on Koji! Kazu exclaimed as they quickly chased after their friend, but they were too slow. Aiya's neck slammed into my hand and before she could retaliate I smashed her into the ground. With her breath knocked out of her, I proceeded to kick her in the side, sending her tumbling some meters away in a crumbled mess. If this is the best Konoha could muster then you will surely lose. I replied, my eyes returning to the 2 charging shinobi. You're going to pay for that. Sweeten. Suiryuden no jutsu. Koji shouted as a water dragon erupted from his mouth and was soon flying towards me. I stared on with uncaring eyes as the dragon smashed against the invisible wall that was the Shinra Tensai. Unable to see past the water, Kazu burst through the water with a Rasengan pointed at my face, but to her surprise Kazu's wrist was soon enveloped by my hand. Shoving the Rasengan up into the air, the swirling ball of chakra dissipated into the air above us. Hiojiazan, Kazu said as she stared into my eyes. We were nearly face to face and she could fully see my new eyes. The water from the jutsu began raining down onto us as we stared at one another. Why are you doing this? Don't you remember all the times we spent together? All the times you spent with my parents? What happened? I didn't reply. I had no answer to her questions because there was nothing more to say. Trying to convince them now was futile, even if I wanted to. It would only do more harm than good. Tears began to well up in her eyes as she felt gravity begin pushing her away. This would be my answer. To push her away from me and allow her to find comfort in the lies of the cages. Kazu's sword flew out of her hand as she was slung backwards, allowing me to catch it in midair before it fell to the ground. It was a simple design, much like Sasuke's was back in the day. Take this you piece of. Koji shouted as he appeared next to me, but my sword was already flying towards him. Shocked by my swiftness, he brought up his kunai to defend, but my wind-empowered sword sliced straight through his kunai. Still, the momentum of my attack pushed him away, but not without a deep slice embedding itself into his chest. Crimson blood sprayed from his wound as he crashed near a slowly standing Aiya. The gap in power between us is clearly visible. Do you honestly believe that you 4 can defeat me? I asked as I began walking to my right. The other 3 were all breathing heavily as they watched me walk, all trying to catch their breaths before they tried again. Or are you trying to wear me down before reinforcements arrive? If that's the plan then your reinforcements vastly underestimate my teammates' abilities. And you vastly underestimate us, Hiojiazan. Kazu replied, rubbing the arm she had landed on from being pushed away. Is that so? Then what will you do to stop me from killing a teammate? I asked as I stopped my initial walk. Her eyes then traveled downward, but widened as she realized who I was standing over. To my right was the unconscious figure of Rai. San. Kazu questioned. Aiya was doing her best healing Koji, but they were still conscious and watching what was transpiring. The last 3 years have not treated me kindly, Kazu. I've had to do some things I'm not very proud of to complete my objectives. I said with a cold tone. Reversing the blade in my hand so I was holding it in a reverse grip, I held it above the unconscious Uchiha, ready to strike. The killing of innocent shinobi is only one of them. But you would have never. Kazu exclaimed. You are a strong kunoichi, Kazu. Probably one of the strongest in the village, but the actions of myself and my group have largely been classified as to not incite panic amongst the people. I strengthened my grip on the blade being held above Rai. Let this be an example of how serious I truly am. No, Kazu shouted at the top of her lungs, but there was nothing she could do. My eyes remained on my great-granddaughter as I brought the blade down onto Rai. The Uchiha's eyes quickly opened as the blade pierced her lower abdomen. She opened her mouth as if to scream, but nothing came from her mouth. Her onyx eyes looked up at me in shock, and after another second I looked down to her as well. If this was your plan for revenge then you had a long way to go, Uchiha. I said as her eyelids began to grow heavier by the second. The last thing she saw before her eyes closed was the red Rinne Sharingan staring back. You bastard, an ominous aura blanketed over the clearing as I returned my attention to my great-granddaughter. You and Rai must have been close if you unlocked the Mangekyo Sharingan by witnessing her death. I stated as a thick white aura blanketed Kazu. In her eyes was a pinwheel with 5 curves pointing outwards. Inside the black pins was a red 3-pointed shuriken with a black dot at the center. I'll make you pay for that. Kazu shouted, a skeleton appearing in her aura as her anger began to heighten. A wind began to swirl around her, blowing against me and making me squint my eyes ever so slightly. Kazu wait, Aiya shouted, but her words fell on deaf ears as Kazu shot towards me. Sighing, I waited until she was right in front of me with one of her skeleton fists aimed at my head before I activated my jutsu. Shinra Tensai. The effect was instantaneous as Kazu was sent backwards, but she landed like a fine kunoichi and prepared for another attack. You're forgetting the information on the diva path, Kazoo. Running in blind will not do anything for you. My comment only served to anger my great-granddaughter further. No self-control. And here I thought you had grown up over the last few years. Must be the Uchiha blood in you. Grabbing onto the sword still embedded into Rai, I yanked it out and swiped the dripping blood away. Let's have this be a little training session, shall we? What are you talking about? Koji asked as he stood up beside Aiya. The diva path, when was it that we learned its true weakness? I asked as I slowly paced towards Kazoo, her white Susanoo transforming into a cloaked creature. What does that matter, traitor? Koji exclaimed in anger. During Pain's attack on Konoha, Aiya said, trying her best to control her anger while also ignoring her comrade's outburst. Very good, and I'm sure that you've noticed at a few points during this fight that I was forced to dodge or block a few of your attacks after I received these eyes, correct? I asked, but Kazoo couldn't take it anymore and charged towards me once again. And, just as before, she was repulsed just before making it to me. This time she smashed into a few trees that lined the edge of clearing. Are you even listening to me, Kazoo? Shut your damn mouth, you piece of. Kazoo shouted, but was cut short of her outburst when a hand clasped around her throat and Rai's sword piercing her thigh. She stared at me with wide eyes as I now stood within her Susanoo with my hand around her throat, but it could be clearly seen that the pain of being stabbed was affecting her. How did you? Revenge will be the end of you, Mago. If you let anger consume you then you'll end up just like your friend, while also hurting those still with you. I stated as my hand became even tighter. Kazoo's eyes glanced over at Koji and Aiya, who stared back with worry reflected in their eyes. Seeing her eyes soften, I released my vice grip from around her throat and, with one swift action, yanked the blade out of her thigh and kicked her towards Koji and Aiya, Kazoo's white Susanoo disappearing as she flew towards them. Her two remaining friends catching her before she hit the ground. If you run in alone like Rai then you'll end up just like she has, but I suppose it's too late now. What is he talking about? We still have plenty of. Kazoo thought, but just as the thought ran through her mind her grandfather melted into the ground. A Mizu Bunshin. He knows Suiden Jutsu. Koji asked. No, that wasn't a Suiden Jutsu. It was, Aiya began to say. Genjutsu. Kazoo finished, her Mangekyo eyes widening as she stared at the place where their enemy had been standing. But can't you detect, and break, any Genjutsu with your Sharingan? Koji asked. That's what I thought too. Kazoo said before a gasp could be heard from behind them. Quickly turning, Koji and Kazoo eyes widened in horror at what they saw. A blade could be seen sticking through the chest of Aiya. Her pupilless eyes held shock as she slowly looked down at bloodied blade sticking through her. Just as the others began registering what had happened, I slowly materialized behind the Hyuga with my hand on the blade. Aiya, Kazoo said, her eyes wide as I peered over the Hyuga's shoulder with cold, dead eyes. The Rinne Sharingan glowing bright red while the Tomo spun wildly. Don't hesitate, Mago. Or, I said from behind Aiya's dying body. You'll lose another friend, I said from behind the shocked pair. Kazoo didn't even have time to turn her head before Koji's own head fell to the golden grass, separated from his body. Not a moment later blood shot from his neck like a fountain, some spraying onto the grass below, and some onto her horrified face. Sliding the blade out of Aiya's chest, I stood up and stepped over the now dead Hyuga. This has to be a genjutsu. There's no other way, Kazoo said to herself as she stared at the blood-soaked ground, her arms hanging at her sides while on her knees. Then why hasn't your precious Sharingan picked up on it then? The me standing behind her asked. Kazoo racked her brain for an answer, but nothing came to mind. It's because it's real, Mago. I said before stopping in front of her. No, it can't be real. You would never kill someone, I asked. I don't take joy in the killing of others, but I'll do it if it's to complete my objective. I don't believe it, after trying to convince you to stop everything you've been doing for such a long time. Kazoo said as my hand grasped her collar before proceeding to lift her up until she was level with my eyes. I guess you really are gone. I didn't respond as I lifted the bloodied blade up and pointed it at her neck. I'm sorry Oji-san, but I think it's finally time. Just as the words left her mouth the world around us began to distort and change. Like someone had dropped food coloring into a glass of water, the world in front of Kazoo continued to change color. And then, all at once, the world exploded in a grand explosion of water. Inhaling a deep breath of fresh air, Kazoo slowly opened her eyes to the bright moon above. Leaning up her body, Kazoo looked around to see Aiya and Koji still knocked out from the genjutsu over to her right. How did you break my genjutsu? A voice asked, making Kazoo turn towards its source. Now on my knees, I stared back at my great-granddaughter in surprise, but my eyes were twitching in pain. Nobody has ever broken the Jimodo Tsukuyomi. It should have been impossible. Gah, I quickly pressed my hands against my eyes as the pain only intensified. Is this the backlash from someone breaking out of the genjutsu? This pain is unbelievable. Oji-san, Kazoo said, a depressed tone to her voice. He must have cast the genjutsu on us after he stabbed Rai while also regaining the motor functions in his other arm around that time as well. Did breaking that genjutsu really hurt him that much? Looking at my great-granddaughter I could see her walking towards me at a steady pace, but I could clearly see that she was exhausted as well. The genjutsu must have taken a lot out of her. Then the pain erupted again at the core of my eyes, making my vision blur. I won't lose. Not now. Not after I've come so far. I then pointed one of my palms at Kazoo while pressing the other into one of my pain-stricken eyes. Shinra Tensei. The effect was immediate, but it wasn't nearly as powerful as I would have liked. Kazoo was pushed backwards, but she never lost her footing and began marching towards me once more. I grinded my teeth together in annoyance as I pulled more chakra to prepare another gravity-enforced push, but a whisper entered my ear as I began to do so. Any more and you'll lose the connection between the other seals. Are you sure that's what you wish to happen? The voice asked, making me growl in annoyance. And it would seem you're nearly out of spare chakra. Can you really win? Breathing in heavily, I began to shakily stand, but the weight of my pain only intensified as I did so. The Shinra Tensei is only as strong as the amount of chakra put into it. With most of my chakra put into the final seal before the battle, and the massive amount of chakra required to cast the Jimoto Tsukuyomi, there was little that I can do now. I'll be the one to take you down, Naruto, and stop this crazy plan of yours. Kazu exclaimed before dashing towards me. My blurred eyes was barely able to read her movements as I jumped to my left just as a Rasengan smashed the earth where I once stood. Lifting up my arms to cover my head in a cross formation, I soon found Kazu's foot kicking my away. Skidding across the ground, I finally stopped just short of the massive tree. I guess, I can't win, I said softly, breathing in as another ripple of pain shot through eyes and down into the rest of my body. I sat back against the tree and looked up into its leaves. A frigid breeze swept through the clearing as the distinct sound of a swiping sword came to my ears. Looking down, my blurred vision focused in on Kazu as she walked towards me with the bloodied sword that was once stuck in Rai. After all I tried to do, it looks like I'll die a traitor to the village I once served. What you're trying to do is kill millions of people, Hyoji-san. Can't you see that? Kazu asked as her slow pace stopped just before me. I chuckled weakly at her words. You know I would never do that, Mago. I replied, my eyes closed as I propped my head against the bark of the tree. Then what are you trying to do? Why won't you tell me the truth? Kazu exclaimed. I smiled while shaking my head. Because if I told you the truth, you'd believe me. Then you would turn your hatred onto someone else. The cages will almost certainly keep their mouths shut on the truth of my plan. When did the position of cage become so watered down? It's best that it dies with me. But Hyoji-san, Kazu said, tears nearly coming to her eyes as her grip tightened around the sword in her hand. The only way to stop the seals from connecting is to kill me. I said, finally opening my eyes. It was only then that the weight of the situation finally dawned on Kazu. What she had been trying to do all this time, her mission, the very reason she came here, was to kill her great-grandfather. And it was now that Kazu Uzumaki hesitated. Memories of the time we had spent together flashed before her as the sword in her hand began to tremble in her grasp. Even after everything I've done, the pain and heartache I've put you through, you still can't do it. She slowly shook her head as tears freely slid down her cheeks. Smiling, I lifted my hand and pointed my palm towards her sword. You were always such a kind girl, Kazu. Never lose that. The sword in Kazu's hand began to be pulled towards my chest as my arm fell to my side. No, please don't make me do this. Kazu exclaimed as she tried pulling the sword away, but the tug from my Shinra Tensei was too strong. Please, Hyoji-san, take care of the family, Kazu. I love you, I whispered as the sword plunged into my heart, Kazu's trembling hands still holding on. Naruto, Kazu shouted as she tried to yank the sword out of the lifeless body of her great-grandfather, but all the strength that she thought she had left her when the blade was plunged into my chest. Huh, what happened? Aiya muttered, the genjutsu lifting from the two with its caster dying. Looking over at Koji, Aiya blinked a few times before her eyes traveled to Kazu. Kazu, quickly standing, the Hyuga made her way over to her friend only to see her desperately trying to remove the sword from her great-grandfather. Kazu, you've got to help me, Aiya. Maybe we can still save him. Kazu exclaimed frantically, but Aiya was only staring at her with hurt in her eyes. Kazu, I'm sorry, but he's. Shut up, Kazu shouted, looking at Aiya with her Mangekyo Sharingan blazing, but the impact that those eyes held were diminished by the fountain of tears streaming down her cheeks. Please help me. Please, Aiya frowned, but walked over to help her friend anyway. Out of the corner of her eye Aiya caught movement and proceeded to grab onto Kazu and yank her backwards with her. Watch out. The two fell to the ground with a loud thud. What are you doing? Kazu exclaimed, but her anger quickly subsided when she saw limbs from the tree slowly wrapping themselves around the body of her great-grandfather. Is it protecting him? Activating her Byakugan, Aiya traced the flow of chakra with her eyes. The tree of life and Naruto are melding together into one. Aiya said. Kazu didn't respond as she watched her grandfather completely disappear into the leaves above, the sword being discarded on the way up. A loud coughing noise erupted behind them. Coming from the direction of Rai. The two quickly made their way over to their previously thought dead teammate. Can you heal her? I'll do the best I can, but we need to get her to someone more qualified as soon as possible. The stab is deep and there's a lot of blood. I can only subside the bleeding for so long. Aiya said as her hands began to glow green around the stab wound. Good, I'll go wake up Koji. Get ready to move, Kazu shouted as she ran over to her still unconscious teammate. Wake up you retard. A foot soon found its way to his thigh, jolting the shinobi awake. Huh, what happened? Koji asked as he looked around. Later, we need to get Rai to a medical team as soon as possible. Kazu exclaimed as she ran back over to their other two teammates. Sensing the urgency, Koji quickly made his way over and picked up Rai while Aiya was doing her best healing her while on his back. Everything is ready, let's get moving, Koji shouted before running into the forest with Aiya at his side. Kazu dashed after them, but stopped at the edge of the clearing. She stayed like this for a moment, her back facing the divine tree before turning around fully. Tears were streaming down her face like a waterfall. Kazu then bowed deeply to the empty clearing. Thank you for all the happy memories you've given me, Hyoji-san. Kazu shouted at the top of her lungs. A faint breeze blowing through the clearing as the words left her mouth. And, if you can hear me, I love you too. And then she disappeared into the forest. A few minutes went by as the clearing remained quiet. Are you sure this is the path you wish to take? A voice asked. The world began to distort and morph until fully cracking away into a world that looked just like the last, except a man stood at the base of the tree staring at where the four shinobi had just left. Tears were freely falling down his cheeks as the red Rinne Sharingan morphed back into a pair of ocean blue eyes. It's for the best, I replied, but my answer wasn't very sincere. If you say so, the voice stated just as the seals connected. You have returned my power and the contract has been completed. Good luck with your future, Uzumaki Naruto. I remained standing in the clearing as the connection between us was severed. What was I to do now? Everyone thought I was dead and the world branded me a traitor. But even so, I needed to live. Even if I had to live alone and away from the peering gaze of the world, I had to live until I was needed again. No matter how long it took. XXXXX. So what exactly were you planning that took 3 years to complete? Isoka asked as we floated above the golden field from which we had the perfect vantage point to observe the battle. I'm sure that whatever you were planning wasn't going to kill everyone like that silver-haired boy accused you of. I'm not sure what exactly I did over the last 3 years, but I do know this is the day that I began taking away everyone's ability to form jutsu. Explain. I made a deal with the divine tree to return most of the chakra that had been stolen from it so long ago, and in return said tree wouldn't take it back forcefully like it had planned before I talked to it. How did you accomplish this? By placing a series of elaborate seals across the globe so that it would slowly drain everyone's chakra and return it to the tree. I commented as I landed near the base of the tree. This process would take hundreds of years to complete, mind you, as the people would never notice that their chakra reserves would be gradually growing smaller with each generation until only the necessary amount of chakra to live remained. Excluding me, of course. And you believed that this was the best course of action? Isoka questioned as he soon landed next to me while writing into his notepad. Possibly. I didn't want to fight the divine tree as it only wanted what was stolen from it, but I was also looking further into the future apparently. I replied as the images of my mindset continued to flow into my head. It's hard to completely understand what I was thinking, but I think that I believe that if this future threat didn't have access to jutsu then I would have the upper hand. So you were thinking long term. Very long term if I had to guess. Isoka looked up at the massive tree in front of us with his single eye reflecting curiosity. Is this tree still alive? Probably. Isoka sighed as he shook his head before turning towards the golden field behind us. Then I suppose we should return then. Quote, question mark, quote. Knowing what I was thinking just by my disposition, Isoka decided to explain. This is as far as we can go before your memories become too distorted. What happens next will remain a mystery to time. I see. There are more instances where you change the world beyond this point, for better or for worse. I'm curious as to what you did, but I must thank you for your help in showing me how you alone ushered humanity into at least 2 new ages. An impressive feat that I believe nobody else has been able to do. Isoka nodded his head in recognition. This will be logged into the history of our world and preserved in my archives. Again, thank you for your compliance. I nodded my head as the world around us began to melt once again. I hope we may meet again and you can further indulge me in your adventures through time. You know that isn't very likely. Isoka softly chuckled at my words. Very true, but I wish you all the best in fixing your mistake. My eyebrows furrowed at his words before the world around us melted away completely. XXXXX. Yuto. I heard someone's voice as my senses began to return to me. Was that Annie? Naruto. Slowly leaning up onto one of my arms, my eyes slowly adjusted to the room. Ouch, I said as a dull thud banged at the front of my skull. So that's what it's like to be sucked into a seal. Are you okay? My eyes turned to see the concerned face of my companion. Yeah, just had a little chat is all. I responded as Annie helped me to my feet. A little chat? What happened to you? The moment we walked in here 4 purple chains shot out of those pillars and connected with your head. You've been out for like 10 minutes. Annie explained as she tried to compose herself, but there was still concern in her voice and eyes. My mind was connected to a seal. Inside the seal a creature wanted to talk. After explaining a few things it decided to let me go, and, the door on the other side of the room slowly creaked open to another hallway. It decided to let us through. It's just going to let us through. No strings attached? Annie asked, clearly not trusting Isoka's intentions. That's right. I don't buy it. Good, I said as I walked towards the door with Annie supporting me. Then it's on you if anything sneaks up on us. Jerk. I chuckled as we slipped out of the room and deeper into the catacombs. XXXXX. I slammed my hooks into a massive wolf made out of the skin of a titan before drawing a deep breath. These hallways and corridors, tunnels and arenas, all held something horrifically different. Titans that have been morphed into animals, or other things that made them more efficient at hunting and killing humans. The deeper we go, the more deadly these things become. Annie removed herself from her titan shell and approached the decaying titan that sat in front of me. The thing was massive, larger than nearly any titan I've seen before. Well, minus the Colossus Titan of course. It's like they were made for this very purpose. To kill anything that came into this room. Annie commented as she looked around the arena. Dead trees and bushes covered the room, allowing the now dead wolf titan to hide amongst the brush and attack where it deemed safe. Are you sure this information is down here? No, I don't, but that's why we're here. To see if it is. I replied as I removed my hooks from the dead creature. Hopefully these things weren't made to keep something in, rather than the other way around. And if it's not? Annie asked. Then we will leave empty-handed. Annie did not look too enthused by my answer, but what else could I say? I knew something pertaining to me is down here, but what it was remains a mystery. Let's just hope that there aren't many of these things left. Annie said as we walked towards a pair of massive double doors on the other side of the room. I want to see the sun again. I could tell that this place was wearing her down both physically and mentally. Nobody, not even Annie, should have to witness some of the horrors that we've seen down here. I'm just glad I had someone to keep my head on straight outside of Kurama. Well, this big door looks promising, I said as we approached the door, but a massive lock sat at its center. The old door had several engravings etched into its side, none of which was recognizable after such a long time of wear and tear. It is much larger than the other doors we've previously come through, but there's a lock on it. How are we supposed to? Annie began to ask, but when I touched the door, a loud audible click resounded throughout the room. The massive metal object creaked until violently falling to the ground, making me jump backwards as to not get hit. Oh, I furrowed a brow at how easy it was to open, but shook my head at this train of thought. Everything down here, the creatures, even the plants themselves, seemed to react to me in some way, so why wouldn't this? Ready, I've come this far, why stop now? Annie questioned with a grin. Nodding my head, we pushed against the massive double doors, making them slowly open. The hinges groaned against being opened after such a long time of being closed. Dust and dirt fell from the various cracks that riddled the massive door as we kept pushing. I was tired of this place. Tired of the constant fighting and killing of these creatures. Like Annie, I wanted to see the surface again and breathe in its fresh air. Finally shoving the doors open, we were once again faced with another massive arena that was larger than the one we were just in, except there was a noticeable absence of foliage littering the room. It was a circular-shaped room with 6 massive pillars built into the walls. A blue hue softly radiated from the cracks that ran up its side. Glowing red roots hung from the ceiling above, with a single large root falling to the center of the room. Lanterns hung from the stone walls, giving light to an otherwise dark room. My eyes finally landed at the base of the root system, where a large dark figure sat on the ground, his back against the massive root system behind him. This entire place, it reeked of me. Taking several steps into the room, Annie cautiously followed me as I approached the large dark human-looking figure. He wore a rusted silver knight set with a helmet that covered his head and face from view. Once fully inside the arena, the doors swiftly slammed shut behind us. The being slowly stood fully from his sitting position against the large root system, dust and debris falling from his body as we took in just how large this man was. Standing at nearly 14 meters tall, he looked to be the size of Annie's Titan form. Between the slit in his helmet, 2 glowing red eyes appeared, looking at us in anticipation. The massive creature bent down and stuck his gauntlet-covered hand into the ground before pulling upwards. A sword, fit to his size and stature, was pulled from the ground. Is he? Annie whispered into my ear. I don't know, but like everything else down here, prepare for the worst. I responded in an equally hushed tone. We moved slowly into the arena, awaiting any response from the Titan, but his eyes remained fixated on me. Who are you? He never responded. Like everything down here, they would simply attack us without rhyme or reason. Releasing a loud bellow, the Titan dashed towards us, the crimson root attached to his back being torn off in the process of his reckless charge. Annie and I separately jumped away from the creature, but as he slid by us, he aimed his sword at me. The massive piece of metal ripped up the ground, sending chunks of cobble and dirt flying up into the air just as my hooks blocked the attack. Still, the momentum sent me flying backwards until I came to a skidding stop on the other end of the arena. This creature was much faster than any Titan that I've come across. Even faster than the hybrids such as Annie and Eren. Looking to the side, I saw Annie connecting cables to a crevasse in his armor before shooting around to find a better angle in which to attack, but the creature seemed to be aware of this and thrusted his sword towards her. Annie's eyes widened in shock at how fast the creature was moving and positioned herself pointing upwards before using some gas to dodge the attack. The sword barely missed her, but then a metal gauntlet smashed into her side, sending her shooting off into one of the blue glowing pillars. Annie, I shouted in worry, but this only made the creature turn his attention towards me instead. Not having any time to worry about my wounded companion, I jumped to the side just as he brought down his sword onto the ground where I once stood. Growling, I began forming hand signs as he removed his sword from the indentation he had made in the ground. Kaden, Goryuken no Jutsu. Breathing in, I released 7 dragon-headed fireballs towards the creature. The creature sliced through the first fireball, but then raised his arm as he took the remaining 6 directly. The smoke soon cleared to reveal a slightly charred set of armor. Bellowing in anger, his red glowing eyes only intensified as he dashed towards me once more. Jumping up into the air just as the sword nearly took my head off, I brought my hooks down upon the creature, but just as I was about to make contact, he grabbed onto me with his free hand. Not giving me time to think, the creature threw me as hard as he could across the arena. I rolled across the ground before finally coming to a stop near one of the walls. This Titan is fast, I thought as I stood up and began shaking the sore feeling from my body. Much faster than anything I've fought in a very long time. How can a Titan like this even exist? The armored creature began slowly walking towards me, his eyes fixated on me. Looks like I'll have to get serious. Just as I thought this, the massive creature leapt into the air with his sword aimed towards me. A blue glowing ball then appeared in my left hand, making my hood blow about and the wind around me swirl at its power. Rasengan, I shouted as I jumped up to meet him. XXXXX. So this is where you've been hiding all this time, a voice said, making the blonde hybrid stir from her forced slumber. Ouch, my head, Annie said as she slowly stood, but then memories of what happened in the dungeon came rushing back. Quickly standing, Annie brandished her swords, but then she realized that she was no longer within the confines of the arena. Surrounding her was a thick black mist that blocked her vision. Where, after all this time, Annie looked behind her, but nothing was there. Feeling uneasy about the situation, Annie slowly began walking through the mist, but then something dashed by. Jumping backwards, she held her swords up in a defensive position. You are a fickle one, aren't you? Who are you? Annie asked, still in her defensive posture. Such a strange question, but I cannot blame you for the situation that was thrust upon you. The voice responded from behind her. Taken from your home, you were made to believe that humans were the bearer of all evil. Looking behind herself, a set of eyes appeared before disappearing within the mist once more. But in reality you were made a pawn. A weapon to be used and discarded when you became obsolete. And what do you know? Who are you? She was beginning to become annoyed at how this thing spoke to her. Well, that's an easy question to answer. Something then appeared in front of her, but what came nearly made Annie fall over. I'm you. Quote, comma, question mark, exclamation mark, quote. Annie was currently looking back at a younger version of herself. Shorter, long hair, happier, but, how? You can't remember, can you? What happened when you were born into this world? The younger version of herself asked, a frown gracing her features. I thought I did, but then someone asked if my past was true or just some images that were shoved into my head. Annie lowered her weapons as the memories of her youth remained vacant. As if they were blocked specifically so she was unable to recall anything. Someone asked you about your past. Annie nodded her head at the question. Who was it? Naruto Uzumaki. The younger version of herself frowned at the name. He asked you of your past. Naruto made me realize that something was wrong, fabricated even. He made me question whether my mission to break down these walls and capture Eren Yeager was truly what I wanted. Annie looked up into the air with a slight smile adorning her features. In a way, he's letting me make my own decisions. Is that why you're following him down into this place? It's because I chose to be here. Not because he's forcing me, and, Annie then frowned as she remembered the dead expression on her companion's face. Naruto's more like me than I realized. Quote, comma, question mark, quote. He can't remember some of his past as well. As if he was forced to forget who he was, but I think he's older than we think he is. I see, the younger version said as she looked to the ground, but then she smiled. As long as you are following your own path, and not one forced upon you, then there's no need for me to be here. She turned and began walking back into the black mist. But wait, who are you really? Maybe another time, when you finish the path you are on now. Until then, good luck, the younger Annie said before disappearing into the mist. Annie went to give chase, but then her body began to fade until she was no more. XXXXX. Do you remember the days of old? The days that went by when we knew who was bad, and who was good. When dark and light could be easily split from one another. There was no murky gray area, at least in our mind. We would always rush into a problem without thinking of a plan ahead of time, but as time passed we began to lose that sense of blind justice. That feeling of devotion to everything that was good. We became the very thing that we thought we'd never become. We became gray. Growling as I slid away from the massive creature, I straightened my back as the blue steam dissipated from my hand. The creature moaned as he too stood from his kneeling position. That was the 5th Rasengan that I've smashed into his body, and it has again and again withstood the attack. Fire, lightning, wind, every Rasengan he took it looked like it did minimal damage. It was like his body could repel most of my chakra-based attacks. Still, it looked like the damage that I have done was still having a lasting effect. Shouting once more, the creature charged towards me with his sword ready for battle. Why don't you just die? Quickly running through some hand signs, lightning began arching over my arms and wind flowed around me. Jinten. Boruto Saji. Disappearing from where I once stood, lighting spears began smashing into the creature from all angles, making him shudder at the explosiveness of the attack. Reappearing nearby, I watched as he began falling to his knees as smoke drifted from his body, but just as he was about to fully fall to the ground he caught himself with a firm foot. Shooting forward, he swung his massive sword at me as to catch me off guard. Without having time to think I brought my hooks up and blocked the attack, but the sword still shot me across the arena and in front of the massive root system that hung from the ceiling. I stood up with a heavy breath as we stared at one another once again. With everything I've thrown at him, every just you an attack that I've smashed into him, a normal titan would have fallen long ago. What was making him continue on like this? What was giving him so much strength? Brandishing my hooks once more, I readied myself as he was beginning to attack me, but just as his foot left the ground a fist was smashed into the side of his face, making the creature tumble over until he finally fell to the ground. Looking over at the source of the attack, I saw Annie lifting her fist to the side as she admired her work. Her work, however, was short-lived as he quickly stood and dashed towards Annie at a speed she was not expecting. Lifting up her hardened arms, the sword smashed into her defense. It was heavy, and Annie was struggling to hold the attack back. So heavy that she fell to one knee under its crushing weight. Not wanting to keep my companion waiting, I dashed towards the attacker with hooks flying behind me. The creature glanced towards me, those red glowing eyes analyzing my movements, and released his pressure onto Annie. Before Annie could understand what was going on, he slammed his foot into her unarmored stomach, making her fly backwards. Lifting his sword into the air as I jumped up above him, I charged lightning into my weapons as I flew towards the armored giant. Metal met metal as lightning coursed down his sword and eventually covering his body, but the giant held strong. With my weapons hooked around the sword, however, I flew over him while using this motion to fling the sword into the far wall. The lightning chakra was just enough to loosen his grip on his weapon so I could successfully disarm him. Now disarmed, I turned to see Annie throwing a fist at the massive armored man. Doing his best to fight Annie in hand-to-hand combat, the creature threw a punch back at the hybrid, but this was easily parried. Using his outstretched arm as leverage, Annie slammed the creature into the ground while subduing him by pulling his arm behind his back. She glanced to me as I walked towards them. I nodded my head in recognition at a job well done. Only thing left to do now was finish him off. Just as the words went through my mind, the creature bellowed loudly and began struggling against the hold that he was put under. Annie pushed harder, but this only seemed to make him struggle more. Finally a loud crack was heard and Annie was flung off the back of the creature. Quickly standing, the armored giant dashed towards his sword with a lifeless left arm dangling from his body. Recognizing what he was attempting to do, I began forming hand signs as I dashed towards him. Futon. Kazakiri no Jutsu. 10 wind blades shot towards him as he was running, each meant to halt his advance towards his weapon, but this did not seem to deter the giant as each blade either left deep indentions into his armor or cut into the sections between his plating. Grabbing onto his blade with his functioning hand, he quickly removed the weapon from the wall and turned towards us ready for battle. Annie was a little ways behind me, breathing heavily from the battle that ensued. It wasn't just this battle that had taken its toll on us, but everything that had accumulated up to this point. With very little rest between the last 3 engagements, the breaking point was fast approaching for not only Annie, but me as well. Its heavy breathing, coupled with its multiple bleeding wounds underneath his armor, and non-functioning arm, meant that it was about to be finished as well. Then I saw it, a pulsating orange glow between one of the cracks in his chest made by my earlier wind technique. Was that? I turned to see if Annie had noticed, and with a swift nod she understood what that glowing meant. A weak spot. With a similar mindset, we dashed towards the creature. Me taking the left, and Annie taking the right, the armored giant prepared himself for anything and everything. Deciding to take a more aggressive method, the creature dashed towards me. When I grow up, will father be there to see me? A young child asked to a person unknown. Your father will be very proud of you. He'll love you for all the good that you'll spread across this land, and when he sees the people you've helped then he will return. The unknown woman responded. The child smiled at her words. Just you wait, father. I'm going to become the biggest hero that this world has ever seen. The child shouted to the heavens. Ducking underneath his sword, I was swiftly shot backwards as his knee smashed into me. Sliding to a halt, I looked up just in time to see the clone I left behind explode underneath him. The giant took the brunt of the damage, but before he could attack once again his feet was swiped out from underneath him. As he was falling, Annie sent a hardened knee into his back, shooting him up into air. Seeing an opportunity, I dashed towards the flying figure and began spinning in the air with my hooks rapidly picking up speed until finally they caught onto his chest. The 2 hooks dug into the crack in his armor and sliced deeply into the pulsating orange glow. Blood was coughed up by the creature as I pulled sharply down, making him shoot downwards. He slammed into the ground, but I quickly jumped into the air while pouring lightning chakra into my arm. Chidori, I shouted before falling down towards the immobile creature. My arm pierced the crack and directly into what I assume is his heart. I could feel his heart begin to slow as I simply stayed like this, waiting for it to finally stop, but then I heard something from underneath the helmet. It was a whisper. Pulling my arm out, I positioned myself so I could see into his helmet. The glowing red eyes was no longer there, but replaced by a deep blue. A pool of blood then rose from the ground near the glowing red roots at the center of the arena. The red energy flowed from the root above and into the pool, giving it a soft glow. I'm sorry, he whispered, a cough making him spasm once again. Quote, question mark, quote. I looked into the darkness of his helmet, only to see tears streaming from his eyes. Dad, I'm so sorry, F for everything. My eyes widened as the words left his mouth. What did you say? I responded as I stared down into his eyes, but his body was slowly fading away into ash. I love you, Dad, he said before his body fully disappeared. A glowing blue wisp rose from where he once was and moved into my body. Did he just? I said to myself, but then images pressed themselves against the forefront of my mind. Falling to my knees, each broken image flashed before me, each scene scratching at the edge of my consciousness. Please, stop, Naruto. Are you okay? Annie exclaimed as she removed herself from the Titan shell and ran towards me. No, this can't be right. None of this makes any sense. I shouted as more images appeared in my head. They were fragmented, and not cohesive at all, but one point was being drilled into my head over and over again. It's okay, Naruto. I'm here. You have to calm down. Annie shouted as she slid in front of me and began shaking my shoulders. Then the images stopped, and what followed was a deep silence. Naruto. All of this, I stared up into the air, my eyes wide in shock. No, it can't be. What do you mean? Annie asked, her wide eyes looking into my blank ones. Looking down into Annie's eyes, a single tear traveled down my cheek as the images finally settled. Annie growled as she shook my shoulders to move me from my deep thoughts. Annie, I shook my head as I cleared my head of the images that appeared in my mind. Let's get out of here then, I'll tell you. We don't have much time. Clearly not liking my answer, I stood up with Annie following suit. Then we have a long walk ahead of us, Annie said as she looked to the closed door. She also took note of my quieter than usual tone. Follow me, I said as I moved towards the root system at the center of the room. A glowing pool of crimson blood ringed the now dying root system. What are you? Annie went to say, but when I grabbed her hand she immediately stopped talking. Follow me, I responded as I walked into the pool of blood, pulling Annie as I went. Once the blood was up to our knees, I turned to my blonde companion with the glowing crimson blood reflecting off us. Whatever you do, don't let go of my hand. Oh okay, Annie stuttered out. Nodding my head I began pulling my chakra into the blood until we began to slowly sink into the pool. Initially shocked at what was occurring, Annie began to struggle against what was happening. Annie, I said, making the blonde towards me, panic in her eyes. Relax. But, Annie, I said in a soothing tone. Her eyes lingered with mine as we continued to sink into the blood. Focus on me and everything will be okay. Not taking her eyes off mine, Annie began to calm down. And then, within the blink of an eye, we were consumed into the pool and away from the hell that we endured. XXXXX. I guess I'm not that normal then. You're far from normal if you hadn't noticed. Petra said in between laughs. The blonde chuckled at the laughing soldier as he waved his hand back and forth in front of him. Right. Our laughter slowed down after another couple moments. We sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's company in this house that was way too fancy for either of our tastes. You know, after watching what you just did, I think I can trust you a little more, Petra said, her gaze on the ceiling itself. Did I just say that out loud? Afraid you did, he responded, a sly grin appearing on his face. Well, I take it back then, Petra said, crossing her arms in front of her chest before looking away with a pout. He grinned at her playful attitude before going into deep thought. Hey Petra, this made the female soldier look over at the blonde in question, but her playful attitude dissipated when she saw his thoughtful aura. I wonder, what is it, Naruto? What do you wonder? I wonder, how much I can trust you. Petra growled as she remembered the conversation she had with Naruto that night. So much for trusting me. It has been 3 days since the Survey Corps has retrieved Eren from the clutches of the armored and colossal titans, and ever since that time Petra has continuously asked Levi if she could form a squad to find and monitor the Angel of Death's current location. Each and every time this was brought up, however, it was shot down. The world around them was in chaos because of the news of the titans within the walls. Once the word that the titans had been dealt with, the people gradually began to return to their homes, but even so there was unrest amongst the populace. It was this, coupled with Commander Erwin being unconscious, that forced Levi to decide that Eren and Historia were far more important than a rouge element such as Naruto. The plan to dethrone the king was their primary focus at the moment, but the orange-haired soldier couldn't remove her thoughts of the mysterious cloaked man. Commander, Petra said with a salute. She was standing in front of the acting commander of the scouting corps, Levi, in the makeshift office that was made in a larger town based in the countryside south of Walsina. What is it, Petra? I'm busy trying to get everything sent to the safe house. Levi responded as he continued scribbling ink onto the parchment below. And if this is about Naruto and Annie, then you know my answer. Levi said as he looked up at his only remaining squad member with a dark look adorning his eyes. Now what is it that you want? Sir, I would like to track Naruto down and. Petra, Levi shouted as he slammed his fist into the desk. A silence flowed through the room as Petra was surprised at his sudden outburst. This wasn't like Levi at all. Why? Give me your reasoning for wanting to find the angel and female titan. Levi said as he directed his cold eyes towards Petra. I feel that they pose a direct danger too. No, Levi said, interrupting the ginger girl once more. Give me the real reason that you want to find him so badly. He stared into her eyes as Petra hesitated to say anything, making the cold man continue with his observations. The two of you grew close when you were with him, didn't you? Petra's eyes saddened at his words as he continued to talk. Because of this bond that was created, when he stole Annie away from us you felt directly betrayed. Yes, I did. You were always the softest one in the squad, Petra. Levi said he began thinking back to the days he spent with the Special Operations Squadron. You're the one that everyone warmed up to quickest, but you were also the most devoted to the squad as a whole. In a way you were the glue that held us all together. I miss them. I do too, but they are dead and we are alive. We need to carry on their memory and do what must be done. No matter the cost, and that cost right now is to follow my orders without question. And what of Naruto? What will happen if he disrupts our plans involving the king? Levi's eyes narrowed, clearly the thought had passed through his mind once before. Are we just going to let him run about and do as he pleases? Quote. Sir, please, let me track him down. I'm of no use to you here, and putting me in that cabin won't help. What if you find them? What will you do then? Are you going to confront them? I know how emotionally invested you are into this if I do send you on a recon mission. I'm not that stupid. I will only observe from a distance and survey the situation. Nothing more. Can I trust you not make any abrupt choices that may put your life in danger? You can trust me. I won't confront them. Levi's cold eyes scanned Petra for any hesitation before finally shaking his head. You have 2 weeks. You are to track them down and report back to me with their location. Nothing more. Do you understand? Sir. Yes, sir, Petra said with a salute before turning towards the door. And Petra, this made the orange-haired soldier stop near the door. I'm trusting you on this. Do not engage if you find him, okay? I promise that I won't engage. Petra said before closing the door to the office, leaving an acting commander debating whether he just ordered his last squad member to her death. XXXXX. You okay? Armin asked as he walked through the entrance to Eren's room. They were currently hidden away somewhere in the forests of the kingdom. Their cabin was small, but it did its job sufficiently enough. Eren was looking out the window and into the forest beyond. He hasn't been himself since the Stohis operation, and since his rescue Eren's mood was quiet when compared to before. I'm fine. Just thinking is all. What are you thinking about? The blonde asked as he closed the door behind him and sat on his bed. Quote. Is it about our last operation, or? Eren flinched when he finished his sentence, confirming his suspicion. Look, I think, I've been doing a lot of thinking about him. Eren interrupted, thinking about how he showed up. How he helped us retake Trost. The fond memories Petra recounted to us when she returned to us. Then I think back to when he took Annie away. I've been doing that as well, Armin murmured under his breath. Something doesn't make sense. He wouldn't just betray us without a reason. I want to believe so badly that there's something else going on. That he really isn't our enemy. That his reasoning for rescuing Annie was for a hidden plan to help us in the end, but then logic sinks in. Eren's eyes grew hollow as his mind began spinning. I guess it's just a hard pill to swallow. He was the person who brought me back from my rampage in Trost, and the first person to fight by my side while I was a Titan. When I was training my Titan powers I would sometimes begin to go on rampages, but then I was able to reel myself back in when I thought of him. Since he was the first one to break my rampage I knew that if I thought of him that it would calm me. It stung Armin somewhat to see Eren put such deep trust into someone that wasn't Mikasa or himself, but the intelligent boy understood his friend's position. Eren was scared and lost when everyone was suddenly reliant on Eren's unknown powers that he was unsure he could control. As much as they relied on Eren at the time, his best friend turned to Naruto for help. For all the pressure that they put onto Eren, the hybrid leaned just as hard onto the mysterious man for assistance. I guess he's just another friend that's betrayed me, Eren whispered. Armin watched as his friend's face returned to the blank stare that it held before. Just like Petra before, he wanted to so badly to tell him that Naruto had some grand plan to reveal to them, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything because what if he was wrong? If he wasn't, he told Eren of his far-fetched theory, then his friend would be devastated once again. So for now he kept his lips sealed. You're a smart one, Armin. I'm sure you can figure it out. XXXXX. Annie awoke in a spurt of coughing and violent flails as she grasped at the air around her to fill her lungs. Tumbling to and fro, she soon found herself hitting a wall, forcing her to open her eyes to a dark room. Light could be seen shining in through the cracks of the old wooden boards that qualified as a wall. Dust lingered in air as Annie scanned the room, but it was empty save for a large flay bowl built into the floor of the room. Attempting to stand up, the blonde found that her entire body ached from the otherworldly trip she had just endured, but she pushed through the soreness and was soon on her feet. Did we just sink into a pool of blood? Annie thought as she moved towards the single door that served as the room's entrance. Once fully removed from the small room, Annie found that there was a slightly larger room with a hammock, table, chair, and fireplace all destroyed from neglect straight across the room. Two broken windows with vines crawling their way in was the only source of light for the otherwise dark and dusty room. An open door was another source of light as well, and if one listened closely, the chirping of birds played at Annie's ears. Excitement built up as the girl moved towards the open door and out into the light of the blazing sun. The sun was blinding for a moment, but when her eyes adjusted, she could see wilderness around her. The tall trees and slight breeze welcomed her back to the surface after such a long time away. Her excitement, however, was suddenly twisted into a feeling of panic. Where was her companion? Thoughts of something happening to him during the transportation, or maybe even Naruto being transported somewhere else, plagued her mind as she began moving down the barely visible path leading to a place unknown. Her speed increased as her panic continued to rise. She needed to find him. Needed to find the only person that didn't see her as a tool, or an enemy. She needed to find her furry. Annie's mind stopped when she heard the soft lapping of water against a shore and a different type of bird singing their heavenly song. Her movement slowed until finally she broke the underbrush of the thick forest canopy to see a massive lake sitting before her. The midday sun glistened off the water and the soft breeze became ever present against her being. The earlier panic simmered somewhat at this tranquil setting, but still she needed to find Naruto. Just as she was about to return to the shack to search for clues regarding her companion, a dark dot caught her eye. Looking to the side, she found the source of her panic calmly staring out over the lake. Naruto was sitting against a tree with his hood down reading a small red and black scroll. Her panic quickly transformed into relief as she approached the person that traversed hell and back with her. She stopped next to the shadow and simply slumped to the ground, the exhaustion that was felt earlier overtaking her. Leaning against a tree next to Naruto's, the hybrid simply stared out over the water with a newfound calmness overtaking her once panicked mind. The only sound that transpired between them was the nature that surrounded them, and for once she was happy to hear the natural world and all its beauty. Sleep well, the figure asked as he continued reading the scroll in his hands. Don't disappear like that again, Annie responded as the scroll was neatly rolled up and secured away. I sighed as I looked out over the beautiful landscape before us. The land of the misty lake. The lake was long, so long even that I couldn't see the ends on either side, but I could see the other side of the lake directly across from us, but it was fairly far away. Figured it would be best not to wake you. I glanced over at the girl and she was giving me a hardened glare, making me sigh once more. Right, I won't disappear. This seemed to be enough to satisfy my companion as she returned her gaze out to the lake with a softer look. What was that? Annie finally asked after a moment of silence. We sunk into a pool of blood and then, she looked over to me with a confused gaze. Teleported here, the images that shoved themselves into my head. It's what showed me that it was possible to transport us here with that large root at the center of the room. And those images, she saw that my face saddened somewhat at her words. They seem to have shaken you up a bit. Yeah, but they aren't complete. The Titan's mind had decayed to a point where he could only remember essential things. Memories that had persisted past the point of madness. Annie looked, petrified at the thought of losing oneself to madness like that, but then another thought crept into her mind. How long was that Titan down there for? How long has those catacombs been idly sitting there under the swamps? Was her companion suffering from the same decaying mind as that Titan? How old are you? I don't know, I responded. This prompted a confused expression from the blonde shifter. Or, to be more precise, I don't remember. Hundreds of years. Thousands. Long enough to remember the last kingdoms crumble beneath the sudden emergence of the Titans. How? She was in shock at this revelation. I can't tell you how, per se, but I can tell you this. My eyes grew cold as the memory with that floating old man came back to me. It wasn't worth it. Annie remained silent as my words sunk in. Sitting beside her was a being that has outlived everyone on this planet. Some would affiliate him with a god, but to her, why did everything down there seem to react to you? Every Titan, every monster that we fought recognized, or at least showed some form of recognition to, who you are. That's because I put them there, including that Titan that gave me what was left of his memories. Annie gave me a strange look, making me continue. I'm not sure why, but, Dad, why? The Titan asked as he watched a dark cloaked figure slowly walk towards him. He was sitting against a massive root system at the center of an enclosed arena. He was tired, sore, and done with fighting. The figure never responded as he finally placed his hand onto the root system, and after a second of watching, the roots began to glow a crimson red. Everything from the ceiling to the hanging plants began to glow. Wah, the Titan began to say, but then a piercing pain radiated from his back. The cause coming from the roots embedding themselves into his body. This isn't you. What did they do to you? Your sentence begins now, and will continue indefinitely. The man stated as he moved in front of him. Now tell me where the last two are hiding. We trusted you. We loved you. No, I won't. Not with that leash around your neck. Then you will lose yourself to the madness. The cloaked man said before turning and walking towards the exit. Once past the crest of the door, said doors slowly creaked closed and sealing his fate. Did you build that place? Annie asked, recognizing the fact that I wanted to move away from that subject. No, at least I don't think so, but I did put them down there. I sighed as one memory continued to plague my mind. Annie then remembered what she heard from at the beginning of their descent. You lost someone you loved very dearly. I frowned at her words as the memories of the two people I fell in love with lay dead in front of me. Long ago I felt love towards another, but then they died. The pain bombarded me again and again as I thought of their deaths. It felt like it happened just moments ago, but in reality, sorry, but can we not talk about this? It still hurts. Sorry, Annie said, but seeing his cold face turn to pain and sadness, for some reason, made her feel pain as well. I guess it's my turn to ask you some questions. Naruto said, trying to pull the conversation in another direction. You want to know the names of the people I worked with? Annie responded. I nodded my head, but this seemed to make her grow uncomfortable. Are you sure about this? Once you tell me their names. There was two people that I had semi-regular contact with while we were within the walls. Reiner Braun and Bertolt Hoover. Reiner being the armored titan, and Bertolt being the Colossus titan. I stared at her as she breathed in heavily before releasing the air from her lungs. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. If I remember correctly, my clone made contact with them within the HQ at Trost. My mind went back to when I helped Armin make it to the HQ safely. I wonder how the scouting corps has been faring since the outbreak. And there is nobody else. It's only you three. There is another. Someone above Reiner and Bertolt, but I never met him. She then looked to the side in annoyance. Or I don't remember. Just like everything else. You'll find the life that you've lost. Just give it time. Annie's annoyed look slowly changed to that of a small smile as we both continued looking out over the water. We remained like this for some time, simply basking in the sun and breathing in the fresh lake air. It was nice. So where to next? Annie asked. In a rush. Annie chuckled at my words. No, but normally you are. I thought maybe you'd be in a rush to get moving again. I suppose you're right, but for now let's rest a bit. I think you've earned it. I think we've both earned a little rest. Annie placed her head against the bark of the tree that she had sat against and closed her eyes. Wake me up when you're ready to move. Will do. I responded as I leaned against my tree as well, but a frown graced my features when the Titan's images returned to my mind. Was me being here a mistake? XXXXX. So it has certainly been a while. Life has a strange way of pulling me back to this story and I can't fault it for doing so. Some of you may have noticed that a small portion of the story was once the bonus chapter that I posted long ago, but taken down because I felt like it didn't fit. Well, I found the perfect place to bring it back into the story and that was here. I was already going to add some scenes of Naruto's past within the catacombs anyway, so it fit perfectly. Also note that the catacombs section was going to be much longer, think 35,000 words longer, but I cut it out because I was scared that many people would get taken away from the overarching plot. In truth, it felt like filler that didn't need to be there, but I could post it in a separate story depicting the horrors that Annie and Naruto faced together. Maybe then, if people wanted, they could read it separately of the main story on their own accord. I won't lie to you, but I've been a lot of traveling lately. I just finished backpacking across Europe for 2 months and I'm planning to backpack across Japan in the future. After that I want to backpack across North America and then who knows. I'm a world traveler at heart and love seeing new things. It's one of the primary things that inspires me to continue writing and I hope that you can see that at certain places within my stories. Also, I wanted to say here that I'm shocked that so many people have messaged me about updating this story, that it brings me great joy in knowing that people actually like my content. I love every one of you and I hope that one day I can return the kindness you've shown me over the years. It's been a while, hasn't it, old friend? I know it's been a minute since I've uploaded anything for this story, nearly 5 years in fact. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't sure I was going to come back because the canon plot has changed everything. Remember everyone, I wrote this during a time where we, the consumer of the Attack on Titan, truly believed that the last dredges of humanity were stuck behind those 3 walls. 5 years have passed since the canon truth came to light. We didn't know who the villains were outside of the Beast Titan, or how the kingdom itself was run. From the very beginning I was working with next to nothing, much like Ancient Blood. I had to create nearly everything for the backstory. From the mercenary group known as the Greys to the noble houses. I even created my own story to fit Naruto being alive during the time of Aot. I created them to pull everything into the plot of the tale I was trying to tell. All of this, and one single chapter of the manga brought the hammer of revelation down onto my mind. So, for those of you who want me to continue this story, I will be going off the old idea that the last of humanity is trapped behind those walls. That all the stuff that happens outside of the wall will not apply to this divergent universe. Everything you think of as canon within the universe, from the founding titan to everything, will be thrown out the window. I will use some things from the canon here and there, but the bones of this story have been set since the first chapter. I would have to pull up my old notes. Find the hard drive that most of my ideas have disappeared to, but I will try to continue this story to the end. Will take a while. As many of you know, my time to write stories have slowly been draining away. I wish I could devote more time to writing. I truly do, but the truth is I just can't. The uploads will be erratic, random, and sparse, but I will try my best. To all of you who have reached out to me over the years about this story, let me address you specifically. I am truly humbled that people like this story to a degree where people would PM me to start it again. I am truly humbled that this story has an Espanol YouTuber translating it to audio form. I am truly humbled that people still leave reviews. I am truly humbled. Damn, do I hate these jobs, James said as he closed a set of double doors to a rather luxurious office. Sculptures and paintings lined the sections of the walls that wasn't covered by bookshelves. But you did the right thing, sending your wife and kids away. Don't want MC in this unsightly business. James turned to see a rather portly man sitting behind a desk. He was sweating profusely as he stared down at his desk in anticipation of what was to come. To think someone paid the Greys to come after me. What did I do to deserve this? The man asked to nobody in particular. Couldn't tell ya, but he did offer a bunch of money for her head, so we didn't ask nothing about it. James spun the cylinder of his revolver and quickly loaded a single bullet. Stopping the motion just as a golden bullet was behind the barrel, James pointed the weapon towards the businessman. Any last words? Will you even remember them if I told you? He responded in disgust, making James chuckle somewhat. Nope, but I found that it makes people feel a little better before they bite the dust. James then clicked back the hammer and took aim. Maybe you can ask him if it made them feel better for me. A loud bang resonated throughout the room, making the birds on the rooftops flutter about in panic. James stayed like this for a moment, simply pointing his smoking revolver at the now dead businessman before slowly placing it within its holster on his hip. He took a deep sigh and fell back into one of the chairs in the corner of the room. Leaning his elbows on his knees, the Grey covered his face in his hands. I hate this job, you know. Killin' people, that is. Every time I shoot someone, it takes a little of me with it. James looked up to the dead body of the businessman and found that it hadn't moved, much to the gunslinger's relief. A mercenary ain't a good occupation for a family man, but someone like you wouldn't know anything about that. You're just an honest man that looked at some powerful people the wrong way. James stood and walked over the side of the desk where a window was built into the wall. The city street outside made it known to him that he was still inside the city of Yarkle. I'm sorry for the pain I've put on her family. Hopefully they'll learn to forget like the rest of us. Not 5 seconds later, the door to the room burst open, revealing 3 military police brandishing their weapons. Everyone on the ground, a woman shouted, clearly the squad leader, but all that met them was a dead body and an open window. James landed on the roof of the nearby building before glancing back at the window he had just departed from. The job was done. Now all he needed to do was lay low for a while and leave the city once the military police quieted down. Zipping across the roofs of the city, James was abruptly halted when a shadowy figure landed before him. It was dark out and the only light came from the street lights behind the dark mantle. How can I help ya? James asked as his hand hovered over his revolver on his hip. You, the voice was feminine, but this didn't help the Grey in learning who stood before him. You're a Grey. James's eyes narrowed as he stared at the girl. And you're a soldier, ain't ya? So I finally found one. The dark mantle lowered her hood to reveal dark orange hair and blazing emerald eyes. You're going to answer a few of questions. Oh, and what are those questions, little lady? Does the name, Naruto, ring any bells? It could, depending on the price. James replied with a grin. The soldier only growled as she stared down the Grey. Got a name, soldier girl? Petra. Well, Petra, if you don't mind, I'm a little busy, but if you want to tag along, I'm sure we can come to some form of agreement. With that, the two shot off into the towards the